how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, TGIF. Juma Mubarak, happy Shabbat Shalom, happy Friday, wherever you may be, however you may express it. Thom Hartmann here with you. I'm live in New York City today, and in our, and in our first, hello? Can you hear me, Sean? Oh, I can't do anything about that. And in our show today, actually, I'll try and turn it up here from this end. Oops, hang on. And okay, there we go. And in our show today, first of all, we're going to start out with Congressman Mark Pocan. I'm doing the show live and remote from New York, so every now and then the equipment isn't exactly set the way we want. And then I spent the day yesterday at Sirius XM. We recorded some holiday specials with a whole bunch of other progressive hosts, and many of those hosts are going to join me today. They'll be with us in just a few minutes, or in the next hours, the second and third hour of the program. I'll also be taking your calls throughout the day. And I just wanted to offer some quick thoughts, and I'll share those with Congressman Pocan on the debates. But this is our middays with Mark has moved from Wednesday to Friday today because of all the events of the week. So Congressman Mark Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, member of the U.S. House of Representatives representing the 4th District of Wisconsin, or the 2nd District of Wisconsin, is on the line with us. Congressman, welcome back.
Thanks, Tom. Glad to be here.
I'm so happy to be able to talk to you, and that all the wonders of technology here are pulling all this together.
I'll bet.
my thoughts, a friend of mine who's the publisher at the Independent Media Institute, they syndicate the op-eds that I write that pop up every week on Slate or Salon rather, Salon and Alternate and whatnot. We watched the thing together last night, the debate, and my major take was that I thought everybody did really good. I was and I finally got it. Earlier with Joe Biden, he would pause or hesitate or kind of go off in funny directions, and I was worried that he was losing it. And it suddenly hit me last night. He's still struggling with stuttering, and that's what's going on, because he was in fine form last night. But I thought everybody won. I didn't think anybody had a bad night. I'm curious your thoughts on the debate.
Tom, exactly the same. I was actually flying home after a very full week in Washington. Saw about 45 minutes of it on the plane, and then watched a lot of the highlights later. And everyone, Andrew Yang did a great job. Amy Klobuchar did a great job. The people I expected to do a great job did a great job. Like across the board, I think having a few fewer candidates gave people a little longer to talk. You had, I thought, some of the better moderators as well. I thought they did a really good job. And at the end of the day, I think we got more content than I think we've gotten out of any of the other debates so far.
Yeah, I agree. And maybe I didn't say this right at the very beginning because we don't have any calls yet, but you're with us for the hour taking calls. It's Middays with Mark. Our telephone number, 202-808-9925, if you have questions or thoughts for Congressman Pocan. And we are live. It is Friday. So we had an impeachment. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah.
I mean, you were there for that, weren't you?
This was a week. I mean,
fact,
we
actually,
passed our budget bills for the year. We did the impeachment process, which really was a pretty somber process, at the end of the day, I think, for everyone. And then also passed a trade agreement. So 3 really substantial things that any one week would have been the news of the week, and we did all of them. And, of course, in history, impeachment, without question, stood out. I think, watching the debate, it was unfortunate that not a single Republican really came to say the president didn't do something wrong. They came and put out a lot of misinformation about the Ukraine and Russia. They talked about process. They made accusations about people that weren't related to what the president did in breaking the law, and very little substance. And I think we came out there and presented our case, and I think the American people have heard it now loudly and clearly. And this president now is the 3rd president to be in this situation that we've seen, and now he's going to have to answer to voters next November. But it was important we did what we did. Had we not, we would be setting a different precedent for any future president, Democrat or Republican. And I'm really glad that even some of the people that were nervous going into this for some political reasons ultimately said, you know what, this is the right thing to do for all the other reasons. And that's what we needed to say on that day.
Yeah, what really matters here is the nation. Well, you want to pick up some phone calls?
Yeah, absolutely, Tom.
Okay, great. Okay. Jeff in Fort Dodge, Iowa, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello, Tom, and happy holidays to both of you gentlemen. I have a question. I've talked to you about this before, Tom. The EPA has released a ruling on the renewable fuel standard. I guess it's just come out, and the farmers and the leadership in the ethanol industry here in Iowa are just having a fit. They say that Trump has let them down. There were waivers that were issued so that they didn't have to blend ethanol. Could you tell me, Congressman, they say the EPA issued that. Who in the EPA issued those 85 whatever waivers to these refineries and gas companies? Is that a board? Is that one person? Is that the administrator of the EPA? Could you explain that to the farmers of Iowa? And who appointed that director?
Yeah, Jeff, I mean, there is one person who ultimately is responsible for this, and that's Donald Trump. And, those issues affect my state quite a bit, too. I have a lot of corn growers, and, it's bad enough that, the president's been fighting via Twitter with China and getting retaliatory tariffs that have also affected many soybean growers and corn growers. But it's really these biofuel standards and issues and directives that have come from this White House through the EPA, and there's no question these are the president's policies that are really negatively affecting farmers. So, my dairy farmers have issues in certain areas, the dairy farmers in my district, but when it comes to especially the corn industry, which for Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, a number of other states, this is a big hit to those corn growers, especially when you've closed out some other markets overseas. And it is Donald Trump and Donald Trump's appointee at the EPA that have made this decision ultimately.
Stephen in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Stephen, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan. And we have I think we're doing hard breaks while I'm on the road. Yeah, we just have 1 minute to the break. So quick one, Stephen.
Yes, Merry Christmas to you guys. Thanks for what you're doing again. My question is, wouldn't it benefit us to have Nancy Pelosi hold off on submitting the transcripts of the impeachment to the Senate at this current time so that we'd have more time to get witnesses and be prepared for next year? Thank you.
Yeah, Stephen, I think right now that's the place that we're at. We're trying to make sure that we get Mitch McConnell to agree to some of the witnesses the Democrats want to bring, so you have a fair trial over there, because right now, obviously, Lindsey Graham, Mitch McConnell, no one has said this is going to be a fair process in the Senate, and this may be the leverage we have. Having said that, I've also read some where they may be able to change their rules and get around that. So I think this is still a bit of an open issue we're figuring out, but right now, Nancy has said she's going to withhold releasing them to the Senate, trying to get some conditions to have a fair trial in the Senate, and we'll see if that can happen. But you're right; I think it's a good idea as well.
That is one woman who takes no guff from anybody. I'm so impressed by
you
her.
never want to be on the wrong side of an issue with Nancy Pelosi. I can assure you that.
Yeah, I was on the air last week, or earlier this week actually, saying, no, there's no way. She can't hold on to it. They've got to go to the Senate. And I was completely wrong. It's remarkable. Yeah. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us taking your calls for the hour. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. And welcome back. Paul in Lucerne, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Well, thank you. I'd like to talk about bringing back the Telecommunications Modernization Act. It seems to me that we had Republicans up there on the committees asking questions just to be played on Fox News so they can further their alternative narrative. And it's hurting the American people. We're in a constitutional crisis, and we have one set of facts that are true, and then we have alternative facts. It's hard to argue with your conservative neighbor when he's getting a completely different set of facts than you're getting. And the only thing I can see to fix that would be the fairness doctrine.
Yeah, Paul, I hear what you're saying. I do think it goes even broader than that, though. We never have had quite the 24/7 news market that we now have, and also social media never has had the influence that it has now, and many of the ways people are getting information, quite honestly, is coming through things like Facebook, where they're getting a feed of things, and it doesn't have to even be things that might be affected by more fair media laws, but it could be they're getting information from blogs and other things that happen to fall in their ideology, and I don't think you're ever going to be able to control some of that. The real problem is Donald Trump has done an orchestrated effort, even before he got elected, to basically say he is the only one who gives the truth, as any good despot would do, that you shouldn't follow the news, it's fake news. Remember alternative facts, or the other, whatever Kellyanne Conway came up with during her original days in the administration. Yeah, alternative. I mean, it's what they want you to do is know that the only place you can actually go is to Donald Trump, much like a cult leader. And that's the person where you'll get your information. And unfortunately, I think they've done a very significantly good job on this. I've read articles in my own state where people ask what they think about on impeachment. They go, well, I don't know. I hear things from both sides. So they don't know what to do because of the false information that's out there. And yet, at the same time, that almost plays into the fake news narrative that Donald Trump has falsely put out there. So there's a lot that we have to figure out when it comes to that, and I think some of it really falls also in social media and maybe even beyond a little bit of what we can control, at least through that one piece of legislation.
Randy in Ottawa, Iowa. Hey, Randy, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good morning, gentlemen. Mr. Pocan, in the spending bill that came out of Congress, there's like 300. They did away with the Obama era taxes on medical devices, Cadillac plans, and stuff like that. Now, what was the purpose of giving those tax cuts? $360 billion, which will go on the deficit. So, did that have something to do with the Supreme Court ruling that was coming out at the time, or anything you can enlighten me on?
Sure, Randy. I think so. What happened is generally at the end of the year there's a tax extender package because we didn't get our budget done on the fiscal year of September 30th because the Senate didn't do anything up to that point. Everything was all lumped together, and this is awful for democracy, and I do mean in a very small d democracy way, democratic way, to have a bill that you can't amend and it comes in this form. I can talk more about it if you want when we come back, but part of this was we've been trying to get rid of the excise tax, and that was something we wanted. Some of it is what Republicans want, and there was some give and take on the various tax extenders.
We'll be right back. Congressman Mark Pocan is taking your call for the hours here on the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm broadcasting live from New York City. We'll be right back.
The America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. It's Middays with Mark Friday edition. And Gordon in O'Brien, Oregon. Gordon, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Tom and Congressman Pocan. I had an idea about the impeachment articles, and there's two of them. So Nancy Pelosi could actually separate the two and send them at different times. But also, I think she could use them as leverage and say that Mitch McConnell has to deal with the 300 bills they've already sent over before she sends the impeachment articles over. And that would maybe bring the issue to light in the press and the media, which hasn't really been highlighted much. They keep saying do nothing Democrats, but I think, she could use this to turn it around to make it do nothing Republicans in the Senate or do nothing Mitch McConnell. Say, do my 300 bills first, and I'll send you one article of impeachment, and then later on in the summer send the second one.
Well, I suppose that's an option, Gordon. I know right now she's doing it trying to get leverage for the Democrats in the Senate to be able to get some witnesses to have a fair trial. And I think because it's related, I think that's the strongest way to probably, withhold sending them over, trying to make changes there. I do think they're not getting very far with their do-nothing Democrats. I mean, it's not landing. Not that we've had a chance to air all the bills as we would have liked to that we've passed, because the media has been a little bit obsessed, I think, around just impeachment and not talking about other things. I can tell you, when I was in the Wisconsin legislature in 2008, I ran our Democratic campaign committee the year we took the majority for the first time in 14 years, and we did some do-nothing Republicans because the Republican majority wasn't doing much. We actually polled it, and people were kind of okay with politicians not doing anything, unfortunately, and I don't know if they're going to really land, because not only are they not factually correct, I don't know if they're even in a place that they're talking to an audience that they think they're talking to. It just may be one of those Donald Trump things. So I think we're fine. Let's get a fair trial, as fair we can in the Senate. Let's figure out every way possible to increase the pressure on the bills we have sent, because many of them have really strong support, and I think you can do both and really push that going into 2020.
That was the slogan Harry Truman used in 1948 to defeat the Republicans. He called them the do-nothing Republicans, and that really worked. But that was back in the days before Reagan, when people believed government was a good thing and politicians should do something. If you're pitching to Republicans right now who don't even think we should have a government, you may be right. I'm curious, Congressman, if anybody has ever thought of passing a resolution in the House, you have a majority right now, you could do it. Not law, just a resolution, or what you tell me what the proper name for this is, that simply says, whereas the correct name of the party that was founded by Thomas Jefferson is the Democratic Party. There is no Democrat Party.
Right.
Democrat Party was proposed by Eugene McCarthy, not Eugene McCarthy. What was McCarthy's first name? Not the Joe McCarthy, back in the 1950s, and he always said and put the emphasis on the word rat. And therefore, the Congress of the United States asks magazines, newspapers, electronic media, and other publication to please use the correct name of our party. I mean, I saw a Democrat Party in the Washington Post yesterday. Horrified me.
Yeah.
What do you think?
It just shows the power of repetition, right? And the president has the single biggest bully pulpit of anyone in this country, and I would argue maybe anyone in the world. So when he wants to put misinformation out like he does over and over and over again, he does change the narrative. It doesn't matter if it's factual. It just, he can change the narrative, just like he's telling you, you only get fake news, so you have to go to a despot in order to get the right information. It's very cult-like. So I suppose that's something we could do, but what I'm really concerned about is how we really get it back to the point where during the impeachment stuff, there was a poll in Wisconsin, and they went down to my hometown down in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and one of the people that was quoted in an article said, yeah, they didn't really know what to believe because they hear stuff from both sides, and there's certain facts that are facts, right, that this is what the president did, and the fact that they don't know to even trust that like you used to with the media is a whole different problem that we've got to untangle.
Yeah. I get people calling all the time who say, I'm an independent. I'm not a member of the Republican Party or the Democrat Party. And as soon as they say Democrat Party, I know that there's somebody who watches Fox News. Because anyhow, Paul, we got a minute to the break here. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have used up so much time. Paul, in Glenside, Pennsylvania, got a quick question for Congressman Pocan?
Yes, Congressman. Nancy Pelosi's holding on to the charges until she gets a clear signal from the Senate. Can she continue to hold on to these charges, and while she's doing that, build up other charges? For example, the emoluments clause, which is clearly breaking the law. Is that something that can be done as well?
Yeah, I'd probably divide that in two areas. One, from what I read recently, there may be some ways the Senate can change their rules and try to get what she's holding up right now, so that's a separate issue then. At the same time, all of our committees that are doing oversight can continue doing work, getting information on the emoluments clause, on the taxes, on other issues, and they're going to do that. But I don't think they necessarily have to be tied together, Paul. I think, we're hoping that she can hold these for a while, but the Senate may have a way to get around this.
And there's no double jeopardy provision with regard to impeachment.
Yeah, I just think there could be other types of things that come forward, and especially on the tax front and emoluments, just as two examples.
Yeah, amen. Congressman Mark Pocan, it's Middays with Mark, Friday edition. I'm in New York. He's in D.C., I believe, or back in the district. We'll be right back.
Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Congressman Pocan is back in Wisconsin in his district. We'll be right back with more of your calls for Congressman Mark Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus.
This is our book today is Playing with Fire, the 1968 election and the transformation of American politics by Lawrence O'Donnell. The first chapter, Seizing the Moment. It starts in 1968. Richard Nixon was in a makeup chair when he met Roger Ailes. Maybe it was the makeup chair that set Ailes off. He was looking at the man who might have been president right now if he had just sat in the makeup chair CBS offered him in Chicago before the first televised presidential debate in American history. Nixon had ignored the network's makeup artist and used a drugstore product called Lazy Shave to cover his heavy 5 o'clock shadow. Nixon once said, "I can shave within 30 seconds before I go on television and still have a beard." The day after the debate, the Chicago Daily News ran the headline, "Was Nixon sabotaged by TV makeup artists?" Richard Daley, the all-powerful Democratic mayor of Chicago, said, "My God, they've embalmed him even before he died." Nixon lost the election to John F. Kennedy by 0.2% of the vote, 49.7% to 49.5%. In an election that close, every mistake matters. A mistake like not getting the makeup right was the kind of thing that infuriated Roger Ailes. Now, 7 years later, Ailes was meeting Nixon for the first time in the makeup room of the Mike Douglas show. At age 26, Ailes looked like an assistant, but he was the boss, the executive producer of the show, and Nixon was once again a presidential candidate in what was beginning to look like a crowded field covering the 1968 Republican nomination. Ailes wanted Nixon to be president, and he knew the most powerful force blocking Nixon's path to the White House was television. To win the White House in the 1960s, you had to understand and respect the power of television. Ailes also knew that one of Nixon's potential rivals for the Republican nomination understood everything about television, Ronald Reagan, the former film and TV actor. Ailes wondered what Nixon had learned about TV since the makeup disaster of the 1960 campaign. Sitting in the makeup chair, Nixon offhandedly mentioned to Ailes how silly it felt to try to reach voters by appearing on an afternoon talk show like this one instead of a news show like Meet the Press. The Mike Douglas show is targeted at housewives and usually populated by B-list showbiz celebrities. In response, Ailes instantly rattled off a list of every bad move Nixon had ever made on TV, and it was a long list. Ailes was a teenager when he'd seen some of these things. This was not the way people talked to former Vice President Richard Milhous Nixon. There was none of the deference Nixon had become accustomed to over the decades, and Nixon loved it. Nixon made Ailes an offer he couldn't refuse. Instead of trying to make Mike Douglas America's biggest afternoon TV star, make Richard Nixon America's next president. With Ailes on the media team, the Nixon campaign was ready to make the move from being the worst TV campaign to the best. "We're going to build this whole campaign around television," Nixon told his media team. "You boys just tell me what to do and I'll do it." Roger Ailes' career in Republican politics, which included every day he ran Fox News, turned out to be longer than Richard Nixon's. Ailes became more influential in Republican politics than Nixon ever was. We have reason to wonder who would be president today if Richard Nixon had not provoked Roger Ailes in the Mike Douglas show makeup room. Such are the seeds that were planted in American politics in the 1968 presidential campaign. Run, Bobby, run is the subhead for the next part of this. Bobby was a natural on television. In 1967, he was the only potential presidential candidate who could charm a TV audience just by being himself. All he needed was his smile. Bobby was the Elvis of American politics, the only politician who didn't need a last name to identify him. But his last name was everything. It was Bobby Kennedy's last name that made every potential candidate fear him. As the field of candidates began to take shape in 1967, every campaign calculation depended on Bobby, even when he showed no signs of wanting to run, even when he told people he wasn't going to run. President Lyndon Baines Johnson feared Bobby to the point of obsession. Johnson thought Bobby was the only one who could do the unthinkable, challenge the incumbent president's grip on the Democratic nomination. Johnson was sure that Bobby was the only Democrat who might dare run against him. He was wrong. Nixon feared Bobby too, as did every Republican planning a campaign. Nixon knew exactly what to fear. He had lost to a Kennedy before. Losing to a Kennedy meant losing to the Kennedy political machine, and it meant losing it to the Kennedy style. A political machine can be beaten by a better political machine, though Nixon had never seen a better political machine than the Kennedys. Kennedy's style was something else. Nixon knew there was nothing Ailes could do for his image that could compete with Kennedy's style. Nixon couldn't change his sharply receding hairline. At 54, he was too old to do anything but tamp down his short, dark hair as flat as possible on his head. Bobby's hair had grown longer every year of the 1960s. Now at 42, he had the shaggiest hair in the United States Senate. His little brother Ted was the only other senator with a full head of hair. Bobby's hair was beginning to grow over his ears, rock musician length for the Senate then. And everywhere Bobby spoke outside the Senate chamber, he was treated like a rock star. That's what Nixon and Johnson feared most about Bobby, the way the crowds responded to him. They'd never seen anything like it in politics. Nixon and Johnson were both old enough to remember the first time anyone saw fans screaming and swooning for Frank Sinatra in the 1940s before, during, and after every song Sinatra sang. America saw an even more intense version of that fan reaction when the Beatles landed in the United States in 1964. And now Nixon and Johnson saw a version of it happening to Bobby. Everywhere Bobby went, crowds worked themselves into frenzies. When he spoke, he didn't sound like any senator they'd heard before. His voice wasn't stiff and self-conscious. The book Playing with Fire by Lawrence O'Donnell.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. It's Middays with Mark, Friday edition. Congressman Mark Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, congressman from Wisconsin, is taking your calls. And Larry in 29 Palms, California, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good day, gentlemen. My question is, the second ballot, the superdelegates will be able to decide on. How then does anything we do before that make any difference at all?
Well, Larry, I mean, if the primary gets narrowed down and doesn't get deadlocked going to convention, which is extremely rare that would ever happen, then it could come into play, but otherwise it doesn't matter. I mean, if you don't have a vote on the first ballot and it's decided by the elections, which it has been almost every single time, the second ballot will never come into play. So I understand the concern because there's so many candidates and you're wondering, and there's lots of speculation you could put out there, a lot of different variables you could try to guess. But the reality is, let's see what happens through the election process. But I find it unlikely at this point that we're going to be facing a situation where it's going to go to convention to be decided.
Robert in Sacramento, California, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good morning, Congressman. Now that we have full impeachment, has President Trump lost his ability to pardon these criminals?
No, I don't believe he's lost anything yet because he hasn't gone through his Senate trial, and this hasn't taken away, to the best of my knowledge, anything. I don't think I'm misstating this. I can't say that I've got that answer for you 100%, Robert, but I don't see how anything has changed given the powers he has and what the House has done.
Yeah, the problem is that there hasn't been any kind of adjudication of it. The Article 2 says he shall have the power of pardon except in cases of impeachment. Well, he's been impeached. So it doesn't say impeachment and removal from office. Maybe because that would be so obvious, but does that mean that he can't pardon himself, he can't pardon others who might, be witnesses against him, that the vice president can't pardon him? When Nixon got let loose, the theory was that Ford, if Nixon had been impeached, Ford would not have been able to pardon him. But I guess that's the extent of it. Yeah, I have
seen no account say that he's lost any powers. So I'm guessing, because I know this has been discussed, and by people, I've seen no account say that he's lost those powers, and that's what I'm basing it on.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Brock in Beaver Dam, Wisconsin. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, thanks for your service, Congressman. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I had a question. I found it odd that Republicans were using as a defense that Democrats were inciting McCarthyism. I wonder if they even know who McCarthy was.
Yeah, especially from Wisconsin. We know a little bit about Joe McCarthy, right? Almost all the arguments, I spent maybe an hour and a half on the floor during that 6-hour debate, and watched quite a bit more of it where I could in between meetings on TV, and it was all about process. It was about almost like ad hominem attacks. It was about anything but defending the president's actions, because we can't. If you can't defend the president that he broke the law based on asking a foreign government to interfere in our elections because he did just that, they couldn't provide that defense. It's the same reason why the president couldn't have any witnesses come and say the president's innocent, because he did exactly what we said he did. So for them to be putting out all these other stories, they're just trying to confuse it, and sometimes they're good. With some of their supporters are more easily confused than maybe others. But the bottom line is they have not yet been able to defend the actions of the president, nor have they been able to have any witnesses come forward and do that, and that's why their case is so weak.
George in Garden City, Kansas. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, Mark, I just had one quick question. Are there any plans in Congress, or there have been, to take the cap off of Social Security? And I'll take your answer offline. Thank you for your vote Wednesday. Appreciate it. Goodbye.
Yeah, thank you, George. And yes, John Larson of Connecticut has a bill, and I wish I knew the name of it offhand, and I don't, George. But it is to lift the cap as well as provide some additional benefits for seniors. One of the things that we attach people's increases in Social Security to the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, but seniors spend money differently than consumers as a whole. Often less on things like gasoline because many aren't driving, but more on medicines. In fact, I think I've seen estimates of 25% of their income might be going towards that. So it also, the John Larson's bill would change that index to a CPI-E so that seniors would get a little bit more money, and it does a number of other changes. We need to shore up Social Security. We can quite easily by adjusting the cap, and there is a vehicle put forward, and I believe John has over 200 sponsors on it, and we have raised this with Leader Pelosi. We'd like to see a vote on this next year.
Scott in Rancho Cucamonga, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, guys. I'd like to get your thoughts on the whole wine cave debate last night. I have a concern. I love Elizabeth Warren, but I have a concern that it might be naive on her part to think she can run in a general against Donald Trump without having big money donors and bundlers. I don't see how that's possible, and I think the attacks the candidates made on one another regarding how they're financing their campaigns is maybe puts us in a bad place. Citizens United, we don't like it. We would like to see it, done away with. But the rules are the rules as of today, and we need to win. And I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
Sure. First of all, I think Bernie Sanders first, when he ran 4 years ago, and Elizabeth Warren have been really leading the way on showing you can run with low-dollar donations. You don't have to go to the same old special interest places where they want something for their money, and I completely agree with what Bernie and Elizabeth say on this issue, that when people give you big dollars, it's because they want big things from you, and if you can run a campaign clear of that, you are going to be far more independent. I found the debate interesting. I talked to my 90-year-old mother last night, and the one takeaway she had from the debate was, she goes, something about a $900 bottle of wine at an event, and she could understand in a place like Wisconsin where we don't like to crack the $12 bottle of wine price. $900 is pretty crazy, and that's not people who have the average American's best interest. So I think a good point, and more than a point, a really good message and principle was made that when you go to people like that for money, they often want something, and it's to make more money, and that's not necessarily in the best interest of the public as a whole. I have always been a supporter of 100% public financing when I was in the state legislature. I think we need to seriously reform this. I put redistricting maybe just a hair above campaign finance reform as ways that we have to make our democracy more solid. And I think that what Bernie and Elizabeth are doing is showing us a very different path forward. And if any of the Democrats who could win the nomination would follow that rather than going back to the same old ways just to get money from rich people, we would be better off and stronger as a party and get more votes and be more successful in the long run.
Mike in Chicago. Listening to WCPT, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, how you doing? I'm going to risk being called an anarchist, Trump supporters, but I want to wish you, Tom, and your staff happy holidays.
Thank you, Mike.
My question is, anything being done to ensure that all the documents and all relevant recordings are being saved in the White House office?
I believe, that's been kind of ongoing. So I'm not sure that we have a concern that that's not happening. So I don't have a better answer for you, Mike, that we have a fear of something not being saved at this point.
Okay. Mary in Las Vegas.
Good morning, and thank you for taking my call. Two things, if I may, real quickly. With regard to the debate, first off, I wish the Democrats just wouldn't go after one another like that. There's plenty of stuff to go after Trump about, and that's where I wish we would direct our energies. But the second thing is, a woman called in on C-SPAN this morning, said she had read an article by some judge that said until Ms. Pelosi hands over the articles of impeachment to Mitch McConnell for delivery to Trump, that technically he is not impeached. I was wondering if you had a comment on that. Thank you.
On the second one first, Mary, I don't know that. Like I said, a lot of this is moving, and we're learning as things are happening, right? We've first had the conversations this week about even holding them back, just trying to get a fair trial in the Senate, because Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham clearly have said it's not going to be one. We need to do what we can there, but I have not heard that anywhere else as a definitive answer. So
it sounds like a Fox talking point.
I don't think
because if an impeachment is an indictment, it's like he's been indicted. I mean, if a prosecutor brings down an indictment, whether, sorry, we have about a half a second delay here because I'm remote, but I think she's mistaken.
But Mary, to your first point, though, I do know exactly what you're saying, right? I mean, people have to differentiate themselves, but I think we should keep the focus on Donald Trump, and especially, let me use that example in healthcare. I think some people have tried to differentiate themselves by attacking Medicare for all, which is still a very popular idea out there. In fact, Pramila Jayapal, my co-chair in the Progressive Caucus and the author of the bill in the House, just showed me some polling that came from, I think it was the Wall Street Journal even. It's still very high, but people have used that to differentiate themselves. Attack Donald Trump and the Republicans for trying to take away health care for pre-existing conditions. Go forward on the value we should all have health care. But I think there is a better way we could be doing this than just attacking someone to get a little bit ahead. And I think your point is well made.
It's 45 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you, live from New York. Congressman Mark Pocan in Wisconsin taking your calls.
Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Congressman Pocan, it's Middays with Mark, Friday edition, taking your calls for the hour. He's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Let's see here. John in Sunland, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi. Thank you, Representative Pocan, for coming on each week and taking calls. And Tom, thank you for doing your show every day. I think you guys both are giving hope to a lot of people around the country. And I appreciate you both for doing what you do. And my question is, there's a rumor that this, the CIA and FBI and intelligence service do not want to give up their methods and sources, and that they know about the Russian oligarchs' money that Trump is using. Also, Trump has a oil deal with the Russian oil company, and this is why his taxes and the Mazar account data and the Deutsche Bank data is not coming out. And that's what's holding up the subpoenas. I wanted your comment on that. And then the other thing is, we need the recording of the call in the secure server. Never mind the witnesses. I want to hear the call. Thank you very much for what you do.
Yeah, John, thank you. Appreciate your comments. And it does sound a bit more like a rumor because we are going through the legal process, right? We have a bill that we've passed, and we're going through that process federally. We also have New York State doing what they're doing around taxes. And part of it is just the legal process is very slow, somewhat intentionally and somewhat maybe frustratingly, but it's part of why we knew we had to move ahead because, for example, in some of the witnesses, because you can't wait as long as that process may take. And in this case, I think, we're just having to wait for the legal process to take its course. I don't believe there's anything out there that's, some kind of a CIA, FBI orchestration to stop any kind of information coming. I think it really just has to do with the speed of the legal process.
Keith in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thanks for taking my call,
Congressman. We have just a little more than a minute to the break.
Okay. Yeah, a very simple question. Seems to me that in an impeachment trial, the senators are just sworn in as supposedly objective jurors, and the Chief Justice presides over that hearing. Now, why does Mitch McConnell feel that he's going to be in charge of this? I thought the Constitution says that it's the Chief Justice. And I'll take my answer.
Sure, Keith. I think most of the issue has just been that he's setting up some of the rules for the process, and if he doesn't allow some of the witnesses the Democrats have asked for, we just want people who have not testified that should. If someone can actually say the president's innocent, these are some of the people that could say it, and if they're not going to allow them to come, again, doesn't pass the smell test. I think ultimately they pay a price for that, but we would like a fair and real trial in the Senate, and I just think Mitch McConnell's trying not to do that, and certainly Lindsey Graham has signaled the same, and that's the issue we're having.
They seem to be proclaiming it proudly.
In fact, I didn't think a juror, if you were in a real legal trial, could say where you stood going into the trial, and yet these guys apparently have no problem doing that over and over, which is, again, why we're trying to make sure we can have a fair trial in place, and that's part of why we're trying to withhold handing the articles to the Senate.
There you go. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. Middays with Mark, Friday edition this week, special week. And we'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan. His website, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. He's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and represents Wisconsin in the U.S. House of Representatives. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Lou in Salem, Missouri. Lou, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Well, yeah, thanks for taking my call. I have a question. I think, we're not getting a message across, and what could we do to do this better? And I constantly hear Republicans saying, well, this is going to cost money, that's going to cost money, it's coming out of your pockets. But if we look historically, overtime, 40-hour work week, ending child labor, public schools, Social Security, every one of them either reduced taxes or increased disposable income or both. We need to grab that message back and don't be explaining why we're going to be spending more money. We need to be explaining that we're going to be giving you money with these programs. Why aren't we concentrating on getting that message out?
Yeah, Lou, I think some of that does happen. Pramila Jayapal and I just wrote a piece this week, I think it was in USA Today, trying to talk about this when it comes to the presidential candidates. If you look at where the vast majority of the public are on some of the biggest issues of the day, the Green New Deal, health care, minimum wage, and go down the list of issues, 60 to 80% of the public are in support with issues that I would call, or we call, progressive issues. So that's not the fringe. It's the mainstream of where people are at. They actually already understand all of this. I think where Donald Trump and the Republicans have done especially well is playing on people's fear and bigotry. So in some cases, it's people who just don't want to see people with different skin colors than their own getting ahead. In some cases, they're afraid that they're going to lose what they have, and they play off of fear. So I don't think it's so much on the substance because, again, people agree with us on the vast majority of issues. It's this other way that they try to manipulate people. So I think we just need to stay true to what you're saying. I mean, those are the positions that people agree with. Let them know we really, really believe them. We authentically believe them, and we'll do it if we're in charge. And if we do that, I think we'll succeed. But I think sometimes we haven't been as authentic and as strong as we need to in delivering that message.
Karen in Scranton, Pennsylvania. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Happy holidays, gentlemen. First, I would just like to give a proud shout-out to my congressman, Matt Cartwright, for voting yes on the articles of impeachment. And my question is, I've been trying to reach Mitch McConnell's office for over 2 years to either speak with someone from his staff or leave a voicemail, to no avail, ever, even in the middle of the night. Voicemail box is full. How do we, the American people, get to him to force him to bring up some of this legislation in the Senate, especially like the voting, the paper ballot backup voting?
Yeah, so Karen, and this is something that happens in our office too. We have 700-some thousand people I represent in a limited staff, and our obligation is really to the people who I represent. So if someone doesn't live in the district, we can't do casework, we can't do other things for them because we're limited on what we can. So it's often hard to get to a member that's not your member. However, where I think you have the biggest influence is your senators. You are their constituent. You can influence them, and you put the pressure on them to make sure that Mitch McConnell's taking something up and hold them accountable for those decisions. So the best way to make Mitch McConnell accountable is to make your senators accountable. And I really don't know if it's worth your time to keep calling his office because I don't think you're going to get through. But call your senator's office, make them respond to you, make them do their jobs. And I think if you do that, and we do that across the country, that's our best way to really influence Mitch McConnell.
Becky in North Berwick, Maine. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good afternoon, Congressman. I've been watching some of these hearings, the Senate, with Brett Kavanaugh, and now the impeachment hearings, and I'm just wondering for a televised hearing, what is the purpose of all those theatrics, and why don't the House members have to take an oath as well as the witnesses to tell the truth? Seems to me that would be of a better benefit to the people.
Becky, good point. And unfortunately, I think for some of these people, they've almost come to believe some of the lies because they've repeated it so many times. And, I watched it, unfortunately, way too much the day of the impeachment day. When we listen to some of the debate, people, somehow trying to shift what Russia did in our elections to Ukraine is crazy. It's a conspiracy theory. It's trying to provide some cover for the president, yet it's not grounded in any truth whatsoever. But you make a very valid point. You would hope that instead of making just the witnesses have to swear an oath, well, why wouldn't the people who are actually representing us? And I think, again, the best recourse you have is in the ballot box. And for those representatives that aren't telling the truth and aren't responding, you can hold them accountable at that point.
Yeah. I think we have about a minute and a half left. Is that right, Sean? Oh. Yeah, okay. So I just don't think it's enough time to be fair to a caller.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on what we should be looking at? We'll be talking again live after the first of the year between now and then.
Well, so, we're out of session until, I think, January 7th in the House, and I believe the Senate is similar. This does mean members are home, although I'll be real honest, we have limited hours over the holidays, as you might expect. But it's a good chance still to get a hold of your elected officials getting ready for next year. We know the presidential campaign will largely take over the national debate more so. That's why I think you saw a lot of legislation get done at the end of the year. But we have some important things to do. That Social Security bill earlier we talked about, we would love to see pass in the House. We need to pass some infrastructure bills in the House. We need to pass the PRO Act, which is a pro-worker act that's really important in the House of Representatives early next year. And we're going to be reaching out to people and making sure that they contact their elected officials on those bills. For now, I think I just really want to say, Tom, I really enjoy, doing your program. Thank you for the service you provide, and to all your listeners, happy holidays. And, this is a great way to have a conversation. We do our best to answer questions. You've always got folks that have really awesome points and questions to make, and I just really appreciate being able to do this every year. So to you and Louise and your family and all your listeners, happy holidays.
Thank you so much. It's been a great year, and you've been a really important part of this. And Congressman, I hope for your entire family that you have a wonderful holiday season, and look forward to talking to you next year.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Tom.
Yep. We'll be back. We've got some folks from SiriusXM dropping by. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
book today is Cyber War, How Russian Hackers and Trolls Helped Elect a President by Kathleen Hall Jamieson. This is from the introduction. Imagine a strategy memo forecasting cyber attacks by Russian hackers, trolls, and bots designed to roil social discontent and damage the electoral process of a major party U.S. presidential nominee. Or, if she winds up winning, sabotage her ability to govern. Guaranteed payoff, no fingerprints, no keystroke record, no contrails in the cloud. To ensure that Americans would believe that disparaging messages about her were made in the U.S., use Bitcoin to buy space and set up virtual private networks on American servers. Distribute hacked content stolen from the accounts of her staff and associates through an intermediary, WikiLeaks. Use identity theft, stolen social security numbers, and appropriated IDs to circumvent Facebook and PayPal's demand for actual names, birth dates, and addresses. On platforms such as Instagram and Twitter, register under assumed names. Diffuse and amplify your attack and advocacy through posts on Facebook, tweets and retweets on Twitter, videos on YouTube, reporting and commentary on RT, blogging on Tumblr, news sharing on Reddit, and viral memes and jokes on 9gag. Add to the mix a video game called Hilltendo, in which a missile-trading Clinton figure vaporizes classified emails sought by the FBI. Employ online agitators and bots to upvote posts from imposter websites such as blackmattersus.com to the top of such subreddits as r/TheDonald and r/Hillary for Prison. Drive content to trend. To maximize the impact of your handiwork, use data analytics and search engine maximization tools built into social media platforms. To test and fuel doubts about the security of U.S. voter information, hack the electoral systems of the states. And throughout the primary and general elections season, seed the notion that if Hillary Clinton were to win, she would have done so by rigging the election, an outcome that would repay her assaults on the legitimacy of their leader's presidency with doubts about her own. Were she instead to lose, she would no longer be a thistle in the toned torso of the hackers and trolls' boss's likely boss. Every result but one produces a desirable outcome for the Kremlin. Outcome 1, Clinton is off the international stage. Outcome 2, she wins but can't govern effectively. Outcome 3, the former Secretary of State is elected and the country simply moves on, but the sabotage nonetheless has magnified cultural tensions and functions as a pilot from which to birth later success, perhaps when she runs for a second term. The only eventuality that damages the Russian cyber soldiers and their commander-in-chief is the fourth, in which, in real time, the cyber attackers are unmasked by a vigilant intelligence community, condemned by those in both major political parties and around the world, characterized by the media as spies and saboteurs. The Russian message is blocked or labeled as Russian propaganda, and when included in media accounts, the stolen content is relentlessly tied to its Russian origins and sources. None of that, however, happened. Instead, to the surprise of the Russian masterminds, as well as both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, he won the Electoral College, and with it a 4-year claim on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Although countrywide she bested him by almost 2.9 million votes, he unexpectedly captured an Electoral College majority by running the table. By the end of the evening of November 8th, Florida, as well as Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, were in his column. The ways in which Russian hacking and social media messaging altered the content of the electoral dialogue and thus contributed to Donald Trump's victory are the subjects of this book. To begin my exploration, this overview chapter will highlight key findings of the U.S. intelligence community, preview my focus on the hackers and trolls and the synergy between them, justify casting the Russian machinations as acts of cyber war, outline ways in which susceptibilities in our system of government and media structures magnified their effect, and note 5 presuppositions that will shape my analysis of the Russian trolls' work, and one that will guide my study of the effects of the hackers. Forming the backdrop for my inquiry are 3 reports on the Russian intervention of the 2016 presidential election. The October 7, 2016 statement jointly issued by the Department of Homeland Security and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence on Election Security. The January 2017 conclusion of the U.S. intelligence agencies, CIA, FBI, NSA, and the February 2018 Robert Mueller indictment of 13 of the Russians allegedly behind the social media intrusions. On a day that will live in campaign lore, as much for what didn't happen as what did, more on that in a moment, the first of the 3 revealed the following. The U.S. intelligence community is confident that the Russian government directed the recent compromises of email from U.S. persons and institutions, including the U.S. political organizations. The recent disclosures of alleged hacked emails on sites like DCLeaks.com and WikiLeaks and by the Guccifer 2.0 online persona are consistent with the methods and motives of Russian-directed efforts. These thefts and disclosures were intended to interfere with the U.S. election process. Such activity is not new to Moscow. The Russians have used similar tactics and techniques across Europe and Eurasia, for example, to affect public opinion there. We believe, based on the scope and sensitivity of these efforts, that only Russia's senior-most officials could have authorized these activities. That's from the report. The next report put a name to one of those senior-most officials and specified an intended beneficiary, Donald Trump. Cyber war is the... Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Society.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Agency who for some reason were unwilling to accept me as part of their team. Unwanted Spy by Jeffrey Sterling.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back, live from New York. Thom Hartmann here with you. Also in New York, Dean Obeidallah, the host of the Dean Obeidallah Show. Weekdays 6 to 9 p.m. on Sirius XM Radio Channel 127. He's also a columnist with the Daily Beast. His website, deanofradio.com. And you can tweet him at Dean Obeidallah. Dean, welcome back.
Thanks, Tom. Good to see you. It's great to see you yesterday here in New York City. So it's a privilege to chat with you twice
really
in 2 days.
Yeah, me too. And I think that when people listen on Sirius XM, I think they'll find that a couple of hours that we recorded there to be really fascinating stuff. I'm curious. Before I wanted to get into your article in the Daily Beast about the trial in the Senate and all that, but I'm assuming you watched the debates last night.
Yes, of course. I'm mandated by contract. I have to. So I'm not mandated by contract, but I feel obligated to. Yes, and I did watch the debates, and it was, the big takeaway is wine cave. I want to go to a wine cave, Tom. I don't know where they are, how you get to one. Never heard the term in my life, but I am intrigued by the wine cave idea of having any events there. Of course, the bigger picture is I wish we didn't have to do any fundraising for our candidates for president, and it'd be pure public financing, and we didn't have to deal with the legal corruption that we have in our system.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this is something that was brought to us courtesy of the Supreme Court with Buckley and then First National Bank and then Citizens United and then McCutcheon, and now it's even gotten worse with McDonnell. These series of Supreme Court decisions that starting in 1976 that basically opened the door to big money, brought us, the billionaire-funded Ronald Reagan and pretty much every Republican ever since. And we've got to do something about it because it has turned, according to Jimmy Carter on this show, has turned the country from a democracy into an oligarchy, and that ain't a good thing. And I'm really kind of torn, watching that back and forth between Elizabeth Warren and Pete Buttigieg, because the simple fact of the matter is, if she or if Bernie Sanders are our nominee, I want them to have every bit of ammunition available to them, and I don't know how they're going to be able to avoid people setting up super PACs. At least they'll probably be done the correct and legal way. A lot of Republican super PACs are actually run by friends, neighbors, brothers, sisters, former staffers, and they just wink and nod at the rule that says you can't coordinate.
Right.
I'm guessing if Bernie or Elizabeth if somebody else independently set one up, they could yell and scream all they want, but they can't force it to shut down. Maybe that's how it's going to play. What do you think?
I agree with you that the thesis of this, we want our candidate to be completely, all the weapons they need in their arsenal have to be there. And unfortunately, because of our system, a great deal of money will have to be raised and spent. So, you elect we nominate a candidate who's so principled that you don't worry about them being bought by, say, fossil fuel or big pharma or whatever big corporate interest, that the money people are giving is because they know what these candidates are about, what they stand for, and when they get in office, they do not change their behavior or their policies to reward those who've given them money. So that's what you hope. That's the best we can do, because if a candidate said, I'm going to not take a penny from anyone, and I'm going to be your Democratic nominee, I think we'd panic, because where do you have the money if you're not going to allow people to raise money for you? You're going to have super PACs everywhere doing what they want, and it's the system we have to navigate through is so inherently corrupt. I have confidence in some of our candidates that they will not be corrupted, but the system itself is corrupt.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough one. And the references that Elizabeth Warren kept making to him, giving ambassadors, big donors money, I figured it was partly, Sondland and all that kind of stuff. I mean, this is just the absolute normal in the Trump administration. But it was in the Obama administration, it was in the Bush administration, it was in the Clinton administration. It has been basically since Reagan. I mean, that's really when it all started. Go ahead.
What's remarkable, Tom, is that during the election season, as you heard the candidates say, the most they can get from any individual is $2,800 under federal law directly. But if they get elected and they are having an inaugural committee, it's unlimited amounts, including corporations. In fact, Sondland was able to give $1 million. Core Geo, that does private prisons, gave hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that bet is even better, because the guy or woman is going to be the president. So to me, I want to hear the candidates, and many who have come on my show, I've asked about this, and have said, of course, we want to change those laws so that it's no longer unlimited contributions to a normal committee, because that's the most corrupting of all. And it's the surest bet for a big company or for a wealthy individual. The person's won the election, and they're waiting in that month and a half, and you could give unlimited amounts legally to their inaugural campaign committee. This is ridiculous. Not campaign, inaugural committee.
And Trump,
outrageous.
And Trump raised almost twice as much, I believe, for his inaugural committee as Obama did, and yet he didn't throw the lavish balls that Obama did. Nobody knows where that money went. We know that the woman who was running it took millions and millions of it. She was an old friend of Ivanka's, but there's lawsuits to try to find that out. Anyhow, I wanted to ask you about your thoughts on the impeachment process and how that's going too, and who if beyond the stuff we've already talked about, we're doing hard breaks in this while I'm on the road here, so we've got about 3 minutes.
Okay.
If your thoughts on the debate last night, and B, your thoughts on this piece that you wrote about the House and the Senate and the trial.
Well, I mean, the debate, I thought, like most debates, had tense moments, it had boring moments, and had a lot of playful moments, which I actually kind of liked. It may have had the most humor of all. It'll be interesting to see how the fight and the pile-on Mayor Pete results in affecting him in the Democratic polls in the next week or two or not. And I think most people did well. I mean, even Joe Biden had some really good moments. I thought it's going to be a question of, are people still making their mind up? And polls seem to suggest they are. Democratic polls that have come out that people in various states, 60 or 70%, have not locked in their candidate. So I wonder how much is going to move the polls, and time will tell. I won't even speculate, because I don't know what moves voters any longer, apparently, at this point, as I'm learning. The second thing about, I think Speaker Pelosi, and I have a new article for NBC News Think page out just a short time ago today as well, that she was a great strategist and better than I was. I was on my show and I was writing about it, and others on my show were calling in and saying, what is going on with Speaker Pelosi in the summer? Why won't she do impeachment? People going as far to say, is she being blackmailed by Trump, or does she want Trump to win? Ultimately, she was right. I was wrong. She knew we needed more evidence to get her caucus on board and get the American people on board. She did the right thing there, and I think withholding the articles now is the absolute right thing to do. And I think spinning it well to the American people, making the case. It's for a fair trial. Everybody gets that. Trials should be fair. If you're not going to ensure a fair trial, why would we allow a rigged trial to take place in the United States Senate? That's not where it should belong. It should belong in a third world country. Trump wants a Soviet Joseph Stalin type show trial. We're not going to give him that. It's a real trial or no trial. I think Trump's trial should be in federal criminal court with a jury of his peers. That's where it ultimately should be. I think it should be there now, but unfortunately DOJ legal memos don't allow that to happen. I think she's doing the right thing, and we'll see how polling plays out in that, but I think it's the right thing.
Yeah, those legal memos, by the way, are only advisory.
This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. The people talking about it like it's Jesus gave it to people. I mean, this is ridiculous to me. And even then, Jesus wouldn't give it that kind of stuff. He'd say prosecute him.
But if some rogue prosecutor was to try to indict him, it would go to the Supreme Court and we'd find out.
Right, exactly. We would finally have that decision. And I would have to hope that if you follow, the Paula Jones case, you look at some of the other decisions, U.S. versus Nixon, I think in certain circumstances they would carve out a situation where a president could be tried during their presidency. I can understand there are real-world impacts of having a president distracted from their job to deal with a trial. But then again, impeachment is distracting, and that's part of the Constitution. So, the argument that it makes the person too busy doesn't, to me, it flies in the face of the impeachment process, which is distracting Trump right now. And that's the best part of this. The more he's distracted, less time for crimes. That's what I think.
There you go. Yeah, although maybe the more time to watch Fox News, and then God only knows what happens, or take calls from people like the president of Turkey, and he'll betray another one of our allies. The great Dean Obeidallah, deanofradio.com, the website. Dean, thanks so much for dropping by today.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Great talking with you. Always great talking with you. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Stick around. We're going to check in with our old friends from the Firesign Theater in a few minutes, and then I want to get into your thoughts on the elections. We'll be back. And welcome back. Thank you. And Joyce, check line 10. Paul in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I was just reading on CBS that the Trump administration is saying that the impeachment isn't really official, that there's no there until it's presented. And so I'd like to just sort of...
Now, where did you get this, Paul?
CBS. How do we focus back at you kind of thing? So I came up with the name El Cuatro, the fourth. So instead of our president, he's El Cuatro. And so that's the back at you. You could say impeachment is not a real meal deal, but you're El Cuatro, and that's the kind of moniker. We have Pocahontas, Wicked Hillary. We have all these monikers that have been thrown out. Hasn't had one that stuck. And the sound of that, the European sound of it, would really irritate him.
Yeah. I just DuckDuckGo'd this, and Noah Feldman, Harvard legal scholar, says impeachment does not consist merely of the vote by the House, but the process of sending that to the Senate. I'm looking at a whole bunch of right-wing websites that are saying the same thing. But, it's going to go to the Senate. I mean, it's going to go to the Senate eventually.
It will. And all of this dodging, this artful dodging they do, we have to keep it real. And a name like that would focus. You need those 3 to 5 second. Oh gosh, it's them again. That debate stage where he just tore apart Jeb Bush and Ted Cruz et al. You got to have a comeback.
Yeah.
You have to have something with some real teeth. And you look at the four.
Paul, I want to get another call in, but thank you. I got it. Thank you. Leslie in Central Square, New York. Hey, Leslie, what's up?
Hi, Tom. How you doing? Tom?
Good.
You hear me? Tom?
Yeah, there's about a 1 second delay here because I'm on a remote. So what's on your mind, Leslie?
Okay, I was like the debates last night. I got to bring up something I think is very important. Last time Bernie ran, I sat on TV here watching them count ballots, okay? And who was running it there said, well, they came up with 20% more for Bernie than they did for Hillary on a paper ballot, but they said they were going to go with the machine, and they took the machine ballot. You know, something's got to be done in the primaries to make sure there's fair, don't use the machines, you know?
You know, if something like that happens, Leslie, and you're a witness to it, you need to let somebody know. I mean, don't wait
It was right on
3
TV.
years and call into a talk show.
No, it was right on
really?
TV. Everybody's seen it. You know?
Oh, that's where you saw it. Wow. Okay. Yeah, I can't speak to that. I wasn't there. I didn't see it. I'm not familiar with that story. I'm not shocked by that story. I am shocked by it. I'm not surprised by it. Leslie, thanks for the heads up. But yeah, we need to get paper ballots and clean up our election systems. And of course, the Democrats have passed 2 pieces of legislation out of the House that would do that. And of course, they're sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk. We'll be right back.
Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
So one of my all-time favorite all-American comedy groups is the Firesign Theater. They are just absolutely spectacular. And Phil Proctor was one of the founders of that. You can find Phil's work all over the place. And he and Samuel Joseph, are the authors of a new book with a foreword by Thom Hartmann titled, What to Say to Your Crazy Right-Wing Uncle, Talking Points for Liberals. Phil is a writer and an Emmy and Academy Award-winning voice actor, lifelong member of the Firesign Theater. And guys, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Nice to talk to you again. Happy.
Yeah, it's great to have you both on. Yeah, there you go. There's lots of happy Festivus. Happy Pastafarian holiday.
Right. I have to explain to your listeners that you wrote a very moving forward for us. Moving forward, got it? All right. I just want to put out this book.
I got it.
This book is a great gift idea for Christmas. You know, the last time that Sam and I talked to you was about a play that we have touring the country called God Elvis, and starring Ed Asner, and we constantly have to revise that because of what the orange one does, right? Well, we can't revise our book, What to Say to Your Crazy Right-Wing Uncle. So we worked really hard, especially Sam, to find talking points that are pretty evergreen, you know, and that you'll be able to use into the new year in the 2020, where we hope we have a better vision of the world.
By the way, I'm on remote here in New York, and you guys are in Los Angeles, and there's about a second, maybe a second and a half delay here. So, we will talk over each other from time to time, and it's just, there's nothing we can do about it. My apologies in advance. PlanetProctor.com, by the way, for Phil. And Firesign Phil is his Twitter handle, and Sam is Samuel W. Joseph. So is this book a book that it's going to teach you how to talk back to your crazy right-wing uncle, but is it going to teach you to talk back in a way that you might want to do over a Christmas or Hanukkah or Pastafarian dinner, or is this more for on Facebook?
I think it's both. People, we do it in a very respectful manner. So it comes in the form of a dialogue. It's almost Socratic. So the crazy uncle says something, and the nephew responds, and gives a reasonable, decent answer to the stuff we hear over and over again that people are brainwashed into believing or thinking. One of the things that's always driven me crazy is that people say, well, both sides are corrupt. Something like that, right? And in our book, we said the uncle says that's ridiculous. They're both equally corrupt, and we go, well, do the math. From 1961 to 2016, over 56 years, Democrats have held the presidency for 28, Republicans for 28. Over that time, Democrats have 7 indicted, 3 convicted, and 1 person went to prison. Now, if you look at the Republicans, 126 indicted, 113 convicted, 39 went to prison. Or put it this way, Republicans are 18 times more corrupt than Democrats. So we have things like that where we just say, no, it's not true. They're not both equally corrupt. And now, whether that gets through to some people, or a lot of people, it won't. But some people, it will.
Right, yeah, that's...
the book is What to Say to Your Crazy Right-Wing Uncle. Excuse me, go ahead.
Right. That's right. It's available on Amazon. Is it everything? Okay, and the fact is that in the give and take in the dialogue between the uncle and the nephew, there are concessions made on the liberal side as well regarding certain aspects of American culture that they will agree on, to make the world a better place.
For instance, we don't think it's a good idea to ban people from speaking at colleges.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, issues like that. So, but it does stimulate one's mind, whatever side of the debate that you're on. It will give you food for thought, and it may even stimulate more conservative people to rethink some of their arguments. They may not change their minds, but they may have to rethink their arguments, and that might have some influence on making the world a better place and bringing us together.
We're talking to Phil Proctor and Samuel W. Joseph. They wrote a book that I wrote the foreword for, or for which I wrote the foreword. What to Say to Your Crazy Right-Wing Uncle, Talking Points for Liberals. And a great gift as well. It's you see the whole thing.
Well, also, there's a lot of...
did you guys watch the debates last night, by the way?
Go ahead. I like to catch up on these things afterwards because my life is unfortunately extremely busy, and we were having a holiday dinner with my daughter and her grandkids last night. But I'm catching up with everything right now, and it's another exciting day in the neighborhood.
I'm both. Hello?
Yeah, you can finish your thought. We got about 10 seconds.
I thought they were both good, and I'm still concerned.
Listen,
there you go. Okay, Phil Proctor and Samuel W. Joseph. The book is What to Say to Your Crazy Right-Wing Uncle, Talking Points for Liberals, available wherever fine books are offered. PlanetProctor.com. Thanks, guys.
On Amazon. Thank you. Thank you.
Merry Christmas to you from Melinda.
Okay.
Bye.
Thanks. We'll be right back. I'll be picking up your calls right after this. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Today we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016, President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era. Quote, we've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze, end quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, and more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past to determine who we are. Douglass's life and writing emerged from nearly the full scope of the 19th century, representative of the best and the worst in the American spirit. Douglass constantly probed the ironies of America's contradictions over slavery and race. Few Americans use Shakespeare and the Bible to comprehend his story and that of his people as much as Douglass. And there may be no better example of an American radical patriot than the slave who became a lyrical prophet of freedom, natural rights, and human equality. Obama channeled Douglass in his dedication speech, knowingly or not. So do many people today. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave, in Talbot County, Maryland, in February 1818, the future Frederick Douglass was the son of Harriet Bailey, one of 5 daughters of Betsy Bailey, and with some likelihood his mother's white owner. He saw his mother for the last time in 1825, though he hardly knew her. She died the following year. Douglass lived 20 years as a slave and nearly 9 years as a fugitive slave subject to recapture. From the 1840s to his death in 1895, he attained international fame as an abolitionist, editor, orator of almost unparalleled signature, and the author of 3 autobiographies that are classics of the genre. As a public man, he began his abolitionist career 2 decades before America would divide and fight a civil war over slavery that he openly welcomed. Douglass was born in a backwater of the slave society of the South, just as steamboats appeared in bays and on American rivers, and before the telegraph, the railroad, and the rotary press changed human mobility and consciousness. He died after the emergence of electric lights, the telephone, and the invention of the phonograph. The renewed orator and traveler loved and used most of these elements of modernity and technology. Douglass was the most photographed American of the 19th century, explained in this book, and especially by the intrepid research of 3 other scholars I write upon. Although it can never really be measured, he may also have been, along with Mark Twain, the most widely traveled American public figure of his century. By the 1890s, in sheer miles and countless number of speeches, he had few rivals as a lecturer in the golden age of oratory. It is likely that more Americans heard Frederick Douglass speak than any other public figure of his time. Indeed, to see or hear Douglass became a kind of wonder of the American world. He struggled as well with the pleasures and perils of fame as much as anyone else in his century, with the possible exceptions of General Ulysses S. Grant or P.T. Barnum. Douglass's dilemma with fame was a matter of decades, not merely of moments, and fraught with racism. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret black emancipation, to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the real victories and revolutions in race relations that he had helped to win. He played a pivotal role in America's second founding out of the apocalypse of the Civil War, and he very much wished to see himself as a founder and defender of the Second American Republic. In one lifetime of anti-slavery, literary, and political activism, Douglass was many things, and the set of apparent paradoxes makes his story so attractive to biographers, as well as to so many constituencies today. He was a radical thinker and a proponent of classic 19th century political liberalism. At different times, he hated and loved his country. He was a ferocious critic of the United States and all its hypocrisies, but also, after emancipation, became a government bureaucrat, a diplomat, and a voice for territorial expansion. He strongly believed in self-reliance and demanded an activist interventionist government at all levels to free slaves, defeat the Confederacy, and to protect black citizens against terror and discrimination. Douglass was a serious constitutional thinker, and few Americans have ever analyzed race with more poignancy and nuance than this mostly self-taught genius with words. He was a radical editor, writer, and activist. The book Frederick Douglass by David Blight.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Jonathan Alter, the author, FDR and Obama, the documentary filmmaker, MSNBC analyst, Daily Beast columnist, co-host of a program on SiriusXM, Alter Family Politics. JonathanAlter.com is his website, and it's also his Twitter handle. Jonathan, welcome.
Thanks very much, Tom.
Thanks for joining us. I'm remote here in New York, and so there's about a second of latency, of delay in our communication. If I step on you or we talk over each other, my apologies in advance. The last time I think I remember seeing you in person was in the green room at MSNBC a few years ago. But it looks like you've been really, really busy here. Tell us about Alter Family Politics, your show on SiriusXM.
Well, it's on Radio Andy, SiriusXM 102. Andy Cohen, of Bravo and Real Housewives and Watch What's Happening Live fame, has a channel, and Dan Rather has a show on that channel, and we do too. And basically, it's me, my wife, Emily Lazar, and our three kids, Charlotte Alter, who's a national correspondent for Time magazine, Tommy Alter, who is an HBO producer, sports producer, and he also produces several other shows and podcasts. And so Charlotte is 30, Tommy Alter is 28, and Molly Alter, our baby, is 26, and she is in venture capital in New York. So the five of us basically talk about politics for an hour Thursdays at 10 a.m. And it's kind of like The Simpsons. I'm Homer, Emily's Marge, Charlotte is Lisa, Tommy is Bart, and Molly is Maggie. And most of what they do is make fun of Homer, but we do manage to cover politics and whatever else is in the news in what our listeners think is an entertaining fashion.
Well, you are one of the more thoughtful, insightful, and in fact, I recall our conversation in that green room. You actually gave me some serious food for thought for the discussion that I was about to have, and political analysts that I've known. I've been watching you for years and reading your stuff for years, and I'm wondering your take on, in the broadest sense, the current state of the race, and in a somewhat narrower sense, the danger that Donald Trump might represent to the United States and the world if he is willing to take a call from essentially a dictator, Erdogan in Turkey, and betray, long-term allies of ours and throw Syria into turmoil. If he's willing to take talking points from the president of Russia that indict Ukraine, who is our ally, and repeat them over and over and over again. If back in 2012, when Barack Obama was up for re-election, he tweeted 2 or 3 times, and he said on television several times that he fully expected Obama to launch a war against Iran because that would be something that would be low cost, I think he thinks Iran is like Afghanistan, one of the poorest countries in the world. I don't think he realizes it's one of the most fully developed countries, certainly in the Middle East. And that he might, if he still believes that, I mean, he obviously believes a whole bunch of things that aren't true, that he might even be willing to start a war. There's the story about his national security team brought him a whole tabletop scale model of North and South Korea, and to show him, how close Seoul was to the DMZ, and how North Korea doesn't even need a bomb. They could kill 25 million people with artillery in an afternoon. And his response was, well, Seoul has to move. They just have to move that city, which is crazy. I mean, A, our general politics, B, any kind of danger that Donald Trump may present between now and the time he's removed from office, whether it's by impeachment or by election. And C, I'm curious your thoughts on the debate last night. So because of this delay, it's easier for me to just toss a whole bunch of stuff at you and let you just go riff on it. Go for it.
Well, thank you, Tom, and I'm sorry about the delay. I'm home trying to
it's on my end.
A chapter that I have to get in for a biography that I'm writing of Jimmy Carter that I've been working on for the last few years. So let me try to answer your question this way. It's two parts. One is about Trump. The other is about the Democrats. Trump is, as many Democrats have been saying, a clear and present danger, not just to our democracy, but to peace in the world, as you indicate. And I think you've brought up something that hasn't gotten enough attention, and this has worried me since he was a candidate for president, and that is because he confuses himself and the state, an insult to him is an insult to the United States in his mind. And remember, he's a counterpuncher who believes in, quote, hitting back 10 times as hard. So when, Debbie Dingell comes out for impeachment, he says her husband is in hell. He always hits back 10 times as hard. So what really worries me is that there's some kind of incident in the Persian Gulf or in the South China Sea or somewhere in the world, and he overreacts in a bid to be the commander-in-chief and wartime leader. I think next year he's going to slip pretty far behind in the polls when the Democrats settle on a nominee. He's already behind in a lot of polls. And he is desperate to get reelected to try to erase some of the stain of impeachment. And I think it will stop at nothing to get reelected. We know that he wants Russian interference, but I think he would also go to war to get reelected if he thought that was going to help. And so I'm very, very concerned about this part of it. I am very concerned about what else he could do to our democracy. He seems like he is almost doubling down by having Giuliani continue to, look into his ridiculous conspiracy theories. And there is no more important task for not just Democrats, but a lot of Republicans of goodwill, independents, than making sure that this man is not reelected. And so I just need to say to your audience, I have great respect for you and your show and for your audience, but I do know that there are some people in your audience who I had some very discouraging conversations with in 2016, in the fall of 2016. This was after Bernie Sanders had endorsed Hillary Clinton, but they still were not going to vote for Hillary Clinton. They took sort of the Susan Sarandon view, things crazy. Have to get worse before they can get better. And they, either did not vote for Hillary or voted for Jill Stein or stayed home or just voted down ballot. Whatever they did, it was extremely harmful in an election that was very close. So all of us who consider ourselves progressives have to be really, really strong in getting the losers to get behind the winner of the Democratic nomination. Now, it's possible the winner,
and we all had to vote blue no matter who.
Right. And it could be, it could be Bernie Sanders, and then our task is to get Biden's people, behind Sanders. But if it goes the other way, it's job one. And it's a hard thing for progressives to do, because we are often inclined to form a circular firing squad. And by the way, I don't have any problem with the candidates being very critical of each other during the primaries, and I think it's fine for them to go after each other in these debates. That's what debates are for. I'm talking about after we settle on a nominee, because we've had 3 examples, Tom, in our history where progressives have really, really fallen down in their small d democratic responsibilities. The first was when I was 11 years old, but I remember it really well because my parents were really upset about it. And that was when supporters of Gene McCarthy in 1968, my father was a big Gene McCarthy guy, many of them did not close ranks behind Hubert Humphrey, who was running against Richard Nixon. And Humphrey lost a very, very close election. And if liberals had been more willing to vote for Humphrey, who was an old liberal, they just they didn't think he was anti-war enough for them, and so they didn't vote for him. And he lost by a hair to Nixon, and we got a lot of bad things that happened. And then the next time it happened was in 2000, with Al Gore, and a lot of people voted for Ralph Nader. And then it happened in 2016. So that cannot happen again. I'm sorry to dwell on this topic.
I absolutely agree.
So important.
No, Jonathan, I absolutely agree. And I after Bernie lost the primary, I was campaigning like crazy on this show for Hillary Clinton, and I will for whoever whoever wins.
You're
this
listening
time.
to
Jonathan,
Thom
hang on
Hartmann.
just a second, Jonathan.
Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's Jonathan Alter, the author. He's got a new show on SiriusXM, Alter Family Politics. JonathanAlter.com is the website. Jonathan, thanks for dropping by.
Thanks a lot, Tom.
And welcome back. Meadow in Seattle. Hey, Meadow, what's on your mind today?
Hey, yeah, I listen to your show. Thank you so much for what you do. And I've never called before, but I'm really worried, and I missed Mr. Pocan, but I was on hold, and I wanted to find out if you or he have heard that I just heard from Social Security Works on email that Trump is now attacking Social Security, disability benefits, and trying to throw a lot of people off of that program by changing the rules, and it sounds very serious, and I'm wondering if you've heard about it, if there's anything we can do about it, and if you know about it, or if you can have that guy from Social Security on to figure this out, because we need to do something to stop this.
Yeah, we had a conversation with Alex Lawson about this the last time he was on, maybe 3-4 weeks ago. And you're right. And what the problem is that while Congress says, okay, here's the Social Security Disability Program, here's how many dollars we're going to give to the Social Security Administration to administer it, and here are the broad guidelines of what we would like to do, who we want to cover and how we want them covered, it wouldn't even be possible for Congress to do, individual members of Congress to do the thousands of hours of detailed number crunching and actuarial stuff and all this, that, and the other thing, to come up with the very specific rules about, what hoops people have to jump through, what exactly qualifies a person as able to get disability insurance, and how much they should get. So they hand all that off to the executive branch, the president's administration. The Social Security Administration is within the executive branch, and the head is appointed by the president. And so Donald Trump has appointed a director of the Social Security Administration, as well as Medicare and Medicaid. And I'm not sure if it's the same person in both. I think her name is Seema or Sharma Verma, or Vima. And she's kind of embroiled in a scandal right now about using mind-boggling amounts of government money to remodel her office and stuff like that. But they have proposed a new set of rules for who qualifies for Social Security disability insurance, how long you can be on Social Security disability insurance, and what the specific benefits are that will cause some people. And I don't recall the number. I'm not even sure that we know the number yet from my conversation with Alex. But this will be a very, very bad thing. And the only way, Meadow, that I know of that we can change that is to change who the president is, because this is stuff that the president has discretion over. Just like the Secretary of the Interior has now said, oh, it's just fine to drill for oil on public lands, or mine, for uranium or copper or iron or gold or whatever you want, and they're selling off public lands at pennies on the dollar. Congress writes the broad rules, but they get administered by these individual administrators. Same thing with the EPA. Obama put into place the Clean Air Rule. That was not Congress. I mean, Congress created an infrastructure or superstructure that could do it, but Obama put in those rules in place administratively, and Trump is taking them out. So,
well, what it said is that he's going to change it from that they have to reapply every 6 months.
Yeah, that may well be. I can't say that whether that specific is true or not, but he has the power to do that, and that's why we need a new president. Maddo, thank you.
Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And, we've been talking about a lot of stuff here, but it is Anything Goes Friday. So whatever happens to be on your mind. Damon in Las Vegas. Hey, Damon, what's on your mind?
Yeah, so I was watching right after the election. Let me get this over with. I was right after the election. I was watching CNN. Impeachment, excuse me. And some constitutional lawyer said, don't send the articles ever, because what's the point? And then Sonny Hostin on The View echoed some college professor from Harvard saying the same thing. And then I heard you earlier, so I Googled what I could find, and I actually read it. There's no time limit. None.
No, there isn't.
No. And you, as a professional, you can do your due diligence. So this is for everybody listening. Stop it. Don't send those articles ever.
Yeah,
it's pointless.
They could. Yeah, and this is where I was wrong a couple days ago, where I said I think that they have to send them. They don't. And you're absolutely right, Damon. There is nothing in the Constitution that says that the articles have to be sent to the Senate or have to be sent to the Senate at any particular time. And although apparently he's not actually technically legally impeached until they have been sent to the Senate. But, Nancy Pelosi can hold on to those things into next year if she wants. And just leave it hanging over Donald Trump.
Like I've been saying, like I've been reading on the internet, the day she sends it should be 11/4/2020, period.
There you go. Damon, it may well be. I mean, let's wait and see. The one thing I trust is that Nancy Pelosi is going to do the thing that is both right for the country and right politically. Because right now, right politically means right for the country, because these guys are plain old flat out screaming criminals. Damon, thanks for the call. Lauren in Seattle. Hey, Lauren, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I just want to share a comment and a frustration about the questions, the moderators, how they missed a question last night on poverty and homelessness in this country. We've got 80 million people living in poverty. And the fact that, the mainstream media wants everyone to think that people are thriving in this economy. And there are many people who are dying in this economy. And I really feel like they missed a very good opportunity to talk about poverty and homelessness in this country. And I just want to say, shame on the moderators for not commenting on that. I mean, I think it's a great opportunity for us to talk about the Trump economy. And, people are dying, they're not thriving. And anyway, that's all I wanted to say. It was a bad move on the moderator's part.
Yeah, well, you said it well, Lauren, but there were a number of moments when I know Bernie got into this, Elizabeth Warren got into this, I'm pretty sure Pete Buttigieg got into it, and Andrew Yang might have mentioned it in passing, and that's just from my memory, was that the GDP growth and stock market increases are not measures of the economy that have meaning to anybody other than the top basically 10% of Americans. And, we need to stop using these as metrics to determine what is a good economy. The fact of the matter is we've added a lot of jobs and unemployment's really low, but, many of those jobs are second and third jobs for people. Many of those jobs are people making less than $10.80 an hour, I think was the average, $18,000 a year was the average new job, or the average of all jobs right now in the United States for 40% of Americans. So, it is a grim economy. It's, unless you happen to be owning stock or have such a high salary that you've noticed that your taxes have gone down. So, Lauren, excellent point. Thank you very much for calling and making it. Laura in Lake Stevens, Washington. Hey, Laura, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you doing? I hope you're doing good. I just wanted to say that gosh darn, that Nancy Pelosi, I think she was ahead of the game. I think obstructing Congress is what Mitch McConnell and all of them are doing right now with this decision that they've come up with. So there's no doubt about it that obstructing Congress now, right?
Yeah, it certainly seems that way, and thus obstructing justice. I mean, which are both crimes.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, she said, well, they're all in cahoots. That's what I noticed her saying that yesterday, and it's like they're all in cahoots. And now with him coming up with this decision to not do anything about it is what she said that Trump was doing. So he's siding with Trump, and now we have to just get in there and obstruct Congress.
Vote the bums out.
Yeah,
we need to vote the bums out. Thank you, Laura. Well said. Maurice in Chapel Hill. Maurice, we only have a little more than half a minute. You got a quick point you want to make?
It's a question, Tom. I want to pick your brains about Space Force. Just like you hear like these crazy things that keep on coming up, and you wonder if it's just like a symptom of his egomaniacal narcissism, or does it plug into some kind of fait accompli coup d'etat thing connected with taking over the telecommunications satellites or whatever?
Yeah, my guess is that the Space Force was just Trump wanted to have something big that he could put on his resume and have an impact on the military because he loves the military, or at least he thinks he loves the military. He had bone spurs when the military needed him. I doubt it's a malignant force. I'm guessing it's a little more benign, like kind of a reinvention of NASA. But time will tell, and we'll see where it all goes. We'll be back in just a minute, and we're going to, Michelangelo Signorile is going to drop by.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Entrepreneurial State by Mariana Mazzucato, and this is from the introduction titled Thinking Big Again. Across the globe, countries, including in the developing world, look to emulate the success of the U.S. economy. In doing so, they look at the power of, quote, market-driven, end quote, mechanisms versus what might seem like old-style state-driven mechanisms in places like Europe or the ex-Soviet Union. But the United States is not what it seems. The preacher of the small state, free market doctrine has for decades been directing large public investment programs in technology and innovation that underlie its past and current economic success. From the internet to biotech and even shale gas, the U.S. state has been the key driver of innovation-led growth, willing to invest in the most uncertain phase in the innovation cycle and let business hop on for the easier ride down the way. If the rest of the world wants to emulate the U.S. model, they should do as the United States actually did, not as it says it did. More state, not less. A key part of this lesson should be to learn how to organize, direct, and evaluate state investments so that they can be strategic, flexible, and mission-oriented. Only in this way will top minds find it an honor to work for the state. This is something that needs to be understood not only by the rest of the world, but in the United States itself, where the dominant political narrative is endangering funding for future innovation and economic growth. In 2013, U.S. government spending for basic research fell below what it was a decade earlier, and most likely will continue to fall due to congressional gridlock over the public budget. Rather than static discussions about the size of the deficit, there must be more debate about its actual composition. How to invest strategically in key areas such as research and development, R&D, education, and human capital formation that will increase gross domestic product, the GDP, in the future, bringing the debt-GDP ratio down as a consequence. And how to engage in a debate about the direction of change so that such investments will lead to growth that is not only smarter, that is innovation-led, but also more inclusive and sustainable. These issues are urgent with the upcoming 2016 U.S. presidential election, which could, if properly informed, change the parameters of the current static debate. The United States desperately needs politicians with the courage to swim against the tide of popular rhetoric and outline a bolder vision for the state's dynamic role in fostering the economic growth of the future. In emerging economies such as China, the public sector is indeed investing billions in green technologies with the expectation that these industries will be the engines of future growth. The United States could take inspiration from its own history. In 1961, an American president set out a bold, ambitious, and risky mission to send a man to the moon. Who will have the courage to set out a new vision for America today? Addressing today's societal challenges, for example, those around climate change, requires a vision, a mission, and most of all, confidence about the state's role in the economy. As eloquently argued by Keynes in The End of Laissez-Faire, 1926, the important thing for government is not to do things which individuals are doing already and to do them a little better or a little worse, but to do those things which at present are not done at all. End of quote. This, however, requires the public sector to have vision and confidence, increasingly missing today. Why? What is the role of the public sector in economic growth? After the financial crisis, with public budgets bloated, mainly due to their role in saving the private sector, across the globe we are hearing that in order for nations to be competitive, innovative, and dynamic, we must have more market and less state. As at best we are told, Governments merely facilitate the economic dynamism of the private sector. At worst, their lumbering, heavy-handed, and bureaucratic institutions actively inhibit it. The fast-moving, risk-loving, and pioneering private sector, by contrast, is what really drives the type of innovation that creates economic growth. According to this view, the secret behind an engine of innovation like Silicon Valley lies in its entrepreneurs and venture capitalists. The state can intervene in the economy, but only to fix market failures or to level the playing field. It can regulate the private sector in order to account for the external costs companies may impose on the public, like pollution, and it can invest in public goods, such as basic scientific research or the development of drugs with little market potential. To some on the political right, even fixing market failures would be a sin, because such attempts would lead to worse outcomes in the form of government failures. What all these views have in common is the assumption that the state should stick to fixing markets, not directly trying to create and shape them. A 2012 Economist article on the future of manufacturing encapsulates this common misperception. This book is committed to dismantling this false image, which underpins a global trend promoted by conservative economists, politicians, and the media of bashing and diminishing the importance of the state. It focuses on what Tony Judt called a discursive battle. How we talk about the state matters. Depicting private business as the innovative force while the state is cast as the inertial one, necessary for the basics but too large and heavy to be the dynamic engine, is a description that can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we continue to depict the state, continues. So the book is The Entrepreneurial State by Mariana Mazzucato.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Persist. Chapter 1, Killing a Nation. The book Fred Kaplan's The Bomb.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the third hour of our program. Michelangelo Signorile is on the line with us. He's a journalist, commentator, and the host on SiriusXM of the Michelangelo Signorile Show on SiriusXM Progress, the same channel where you can hear me, 127. His show follows mine. It's 3 to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday. His website, msignorile, signorile.com, and that's also his Twitter handle. Michelangelo, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Tom. Great to be on.
I am so glad to have you with us. By the way, I'm doing this remote, so there's just a very slight delay. If I step on you, my apologies in advance. First of all, tell our listeners, for people who may not have subscribed to SiriusXM yet, which is also available on an app over the internet. You don't have to have a car and a satellite receiver. About your program, about you and about your program.
Well, I'm on every afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. We go all over the country on SiriusXM, and as you said, on the app, which if people can get a online-only or app-only subscription. A lot of people don't even listen in their car. If they do get a car subscription, they also get the app subscription, so that's great. They can listen anywhere. And I've been doing this show on SiriusXM since about 2003, when I was on the first LGBT channel here on SiriusXM. Moved over to Progress, the larger progressive channel, a few years ago. When we first started, we had like 30,000 subscribers. Now we have like 36 million. So I've been here as SiriusXM has grown. I'm a longtime author and journalist. As you said, I was an editor-at-large at The Advocate, editor-at-large at Out magazine, covering gay politics, LGBT rights, and covering the movement, and have written about, I guess it's 5 books, and have been really very much myself involved in a lot of the movement for LGBT rights as an activist over the years, and privileged to have a platform to talk about that. And now, of course, everything else that we talk about on Sirius XM Progress, which is the progressive political talk channel on Sirius XM, and we've been immersed in Trump world and the disaster and the impeachment of late and everything else.
Yeah, and you do a spectacular job of it. When I get off the air, Louise and I, a couple days a week, we'll go out to lunch or we'll go visit our kids, and we have a Sirius receiver in our car and listen to your show as we're driving around, and you really hit the sweet spot very, 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 very frequently. And it sounds like we started the same year. I didn't realize you started in 2003. That's when we started this program. I think of you as one of the more astute political observers of the American political scene, and your point of view is also informed by being a member of a minority group, a relatively rigorously persecuted minority group, particularly in the past. I'm curious your take on the current political landscape in America. Where do you think this is all going? What probability would you assign to Trump getting reelected, and if he is reelected, to his doing as Orban has done in Hungary, or Duterte has done in the Philippines, or Modi is in the process of doing in India, basically flipping the country from democracy to oligarchy to a strongman form of government? And let me just start with that.
Well, let me first say I really am enormously complimented and certainly humbled by your comments about me, because I have followed your show, and your breadth of knowledge has helped to inform me, and it's great coming on right after you on the channel as well, and certainly listened to you and have read your work, so thank you for that. I think right now the energy and the excitement is on the side of progressives, and certainly progressives really generating the enthusiasm in the base of the Democratic Party. So I think the probability is more that a Democrat is going to win the election, but there is the possibility with Trump. I'm not in any way ruling that out. If I had to give a number of a probability, maybe he has a 30 or 40% chance, but isn't that what they said in 2016? Maybe it was even lower than that, a lot lower by some estimates. So I don't think we can in any way assume anything. We have the Electoral College, which you've certainly focused on a lot. We have so many things, voter suppression, so many things that work against Democrats and progressives, and that the Republican Party has rigged over the years. So we have to overperform. And that is what we did in 2018. We had to overperform. We actually overperformed enough to beat the gerrymander. They thought they had it all rigged, where they were going to win no matter what. That's why they rewrote the rules in 2015 that Nancy Pelosi then used for the impeachment. They never thought they would actually be out of power, I think. But we had to overperform. And I think that's what we're going to have to do in 2020, because to your second point, it's absolutely clear to me that is what Trump will do in terms of looking at Viktor Orban, looking at other authoritarian figures. He looks up to these people. He likes the idea that they do not have to answer to anyone. He hates that he has to answer to a Congress. He hates that he has to answer to a judiciary unless he installs the judges, right? So I think it's certain he will do that. And we have a Republican Party that is enabling him to do that, and that's what's very dangerous.
Yeah, in a way that I would say is both morally and in many cases even legally criminal. It's breathtaking. I watched the debates last night. In fact, with a friend of mine, he's the guy who runs the Independent Media Institute, who syndicates a lot of my writing. And I was really, really pleased, generally speaking. I thought even the candidates who turned in what I thought were very weak performances in the past, including Joe Biden and Amy Klobuchar, came out with a very strong performance. So in the 30 seconds we've got before we hit a hard break here, which we have to do when we're on the road, I'm curious your thoughts on what happened last night.
I agree with you. I think having more candidates is better. I think they make each other better. I think even, as you said, Joe Biden and Amy Klobuchar, a lot of whose ideas I may not agree with, they were sharper. I think all of these candidates are influencing one another, and I think it's spirited, and I think we're going to produce a candidate who can really rally people.
Yeah, I do too, and the thing about Biden, before I had thought maybe he's just getting a little old. Because he would lose words. But what I figured out last night, because I didn't know that he was a stutterer, what I figured out last night is he's still fighting with that. And a word goes into space or something. It's not that he's getting old. It's that he's fighting stuttering. What do you think?
Yes, and he has talked about that in the past. It was something he had to grapple with when he was a kid, and last night, obviously, in certain moments, maybe when he's nervous, maybe when he's excited, it comes out. And I don't know if you saw that Sarah Huckabee Sanders mocked him on Twitter, which was just abhorrent, and it really did tell us a lot about Joe Biden, I think, and how he has struggled.
And about Sarah Sanders.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Michelangelo Signorile, if you haven't heard his program over on SiriusXM, check it out. It's on SiriusXM Progress Channel 127, right after my show for 3 hours. Great stuff. Signorile, SIGNORILE.com is his website. Michelangelo, thank you for dropping by.
Thanks so much, Tom. Great to be on.
Thanks.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be right back. Stick around. And welcome back. George in Santee, California. Hey, George, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. On the subject of universal health care, I think what needs to be added in on the cost is if we had universal health care, how that would affect our homeowners insurance, or renters insurance, or automobile insurance, our state disability insurance. You could just go on and on and on. The peripheral costs of not having universal health care. I'd like your thoughts on that.
Oh, it would save us a fortune. I mean, as an employer, I would no longer have to pay workman's comp. As a car owner, I would no longer have to pay the medical part of my car insurance. As a human being, I wouldn't have to worry that the person sitting next to me, on the train or in the bus or walking down the street who's coughing has tuberculosis, because I'd know that everybody has access to health care, and if somebody gets sick, they get well. I wouldn't have to worry that if our country's under biological attack, or even unintentional biological attack, essentially, that we have a strong, resilient system to respond to it. I wouldn't have to go to sleep every night knowing that 15, 20, 25,000 of my fellow Americans have died in the last 12 months unnecessarily because they didn't have access to health care. And you look at the loss of productivity, how disruptive that is to families, when the kids lose dad or mom. I mean, the costs, the financial costs are obvious. The societal and cultural costs are almost never discussed, and they're huge too, George.
Thank you for that, Tom.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I appreciate the call. Let's see. Oh, Sandy, you're in a commercial break right now. Let me put you back on hold. I'm sorry. Mark Taylor Canfield in Seattle. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Good to talk to you. While all of this hoopla about impeachment's been going on, there's been another news story around the world where folks have been commemorating the 20th anniversary of the mass protests against the World Trade Organization that took place in Seattle. So those were major historic events that sort of changed modern history. And there were 2 weeks of events in Seattle featuring day-long workshops on fair trade and global justice issues. Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz was here to deliver the keynote address at Town Hall. So I got a chance to talk to him. Lori Wallach from Public Citizen was in town. And Tom, I was there on the streets as a very young man. You know, that was one of my first experiences of Seattle were the riot cops. And I ended up being the lead plaintiff in a major civil rights lawsuit against law enforcement and city officials for the indiscriminate use of tear gas, which is actually CS gas is what they were using. And I was also a part of this group.
How'd that work out?
Found a group. Well, you know, the judge threw our lawsuit out like 3 or 4 times in a row. So, there are several issues like this ever-expanding no protest zone that was part of the civil emergency orders, you know, where handing out copies of the, Bill of Rights was considered illegal. That's why we formed this group called the Committee for Local Government Accountability and did a big report on it. I wrote a section for the National Lawyers Club report on it too. But the militarization of police and mass violations of civil rights protests, unfortunately, was the legacy of those protests, Tom, and that's the story that we've been trying to tell in Seattle. Just for future generations to understand, you got to stand up for your civil rights and your right to assemble and peaceably protest.
Amen. Mark Taylor Canfield. Mark, thanks a lot for dropping by. Good talking with you. And we'll be right back. John Fugelsang is going to drop by in a little while. I'll be picking up your calls right after this. So for our Thom Hartmann Insider videotape, Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can tell how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Karen in Warren, Michigan. Hey, Karen, what's on your mind today?
Hi. Well, for months now, I keep hearing about Mitch McConnell and all the unpassed legislation sitting on his desk, and it just makes me, my blood boil. I was just wondering why he has such power, one man, to do that. Why can't the Senate force a vote on any of those bills that are sitting on his desk? Or could legislation be passed to limit his power to do that?
Well, the legislation would have to get through him. And yes, the Senate could vote to change the rules so that things didn't have to get through him. The Senate could vote to get any legislation off his desk, in fact. All it would take is a majority. The problem is that one of the biggest things that the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader control that most Americans don't even know exists is a massive multi-million dollar slush fund that of donated money that is then in turn donated to the campaigns of favored members of the House and Senate. And so Mitch McConnell's in a position where he can basically make or break any Republican in the Senate. He can, between the money that he himself passes out and the influence that he has over the Democratic Senatorial campaign or the Republican Senatorial Campaign Committee, he has the ability to destroy any member of the Senate who challenges him, as does Nancy Pelosi. She uses her power, as you saw when she was challenged for being Speaker of the House after the Democrats won back the majority. She does not use her power as a threat the way Mitch McConnell does. She certainly does, however, use it as a carrot. That and the ability to make committee assignments. That's the other big power that they have. Oh, you want to be on the Judiciary Committee, or you want to be on the Defense Committee, or whatever your particular thing is, I can make that happen, but only if you support me. And if you don't support me, you're not going to be on any committee. So the power that the Speaker has in the House and the power that the Majority Leader has in the Senate is pretty extraordinary, Karen. And I don't know of any way to change that. This is something that's been a feature, not a bug, of our congressional system pretty much since the founding of the Republic.
Well, terrible. Well, at least
Anyhow,
Bernie's right about one thing: get
Yeah.
money out of politics.
Yeah, that's probably the number one thing that would diminish the power of both the Speaker and the Senate Majority Leader, is if they didn't have that ability to control these giant slush funds. And in fact, that was one of the things that was dialed back dramatically in 74 and 75 in the good government legislation that followed the Nixon scandals. But that got blown up in 1976 in the Supreme Court Buckley decision. William in Lithonia, Georgia, says you disagree with me. What about? William?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, maybe it is. Okay, that is the delay. William, okay, William, try it again.
I'm kind of insulted by the idea that, because I don't vote for whoever shows up, whoever wins the Democratic primary, I should vote for him, or that I'm stupid enough to stand in a circular firing squad like this guy says. I'm like, first of all, some of the crappiest legislation ever has been passed by the Democrats. I mean, why should I just vote for anybody because they're a Democrat, because they got a D next to their name? Trump is not the problem. Trump is a symptom of the problem. And the Democrats, these crappy Democrats that we keep voting for, is what gave us Trump. So if somebody please tell me why I have to vote for somebody just because they're a Democrat.
Because the most important vote that a Democrat makes, or a Republican for that matter, the most important vote that a member of the Senate or the House makes is the vote that they take on the very first day of the new session of Congress when they choose their leadership. And frankly, in the House of Representatives, when they choose who's going to be Speaker of the House, it doesn't have to be the person who is the head of the majority party. And so, and that defines pretty much the course of everything else, William, number one. And number two, I get your sentiment. I mean, I'll admit, in 2000, I voted for Ralph Nader. Now, I lived in Vermont. I knew that I didn't have to worry about Vermont going Republican. And I'd probably, it was a protest vote, basically, in some ways. But I also liked Ralph Nader. I still do. If I had lived in a state, if I lived in Florida, for example, I wouldn't have done that. I would have voted for the Democrat because I didn't want George W. Bush to be president. So, I think that we need to think strategically. And the other point I really want to make, William, we only have 30 seconds. I'll make this point quickly so you can respond if you want. And that is that if you are that concerned about how crappy the Democratic Party is, please show up at your local Democratic Party in Lithonia, Georgia, and become a member of the party. You can be the guy who's writing the platform. You can be the guy who's choosing the primary candidates. William, I'm sorry, we're out of time. I call again and we can continue the conversation. But you are not without power. You just have to use it. You have to show up. You have to exercise that power. And politics goes beyond simply showing up once every 2 or 4 years to vote. We'll be back. It's 28
You're
minutes
listening
past.
to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And there's a chance John Fugelsang may even drop by, and if so, we'll say hi to him, and if not, I'll continue taking your calls.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Cokeland, The Secret History of Coke Industries and Corporate Power in America by Christopher Leonard. This is from the preface. On May 18th, 1981, 4 Wall Street bankers traveled to Wichita, Kansas. They went there to make an offer to Charles Koch, the CEO of an obscure mid-size energy company. The bankers from Morgan Stanley wanted to convince Koch to take his family's company public, offering shares for sale on the New York Stock Exchange. Their deal was squarely in line with the conventional wisdom of corporate America at the time. Going public was seen as a natural progression for companies like Koch Industries, offering them access to big pools of money and promising enormous paydays for the existing team of executives. All it required from the CEO was to surrender control. Morgan Stanley, in return, would collect a small fortune in fees. Charles Koch was 45 years old. He had run Koch Industries since he was 32 when his father died suddenly. He was trim, tall, and had an athlete's build. He spoke quietly in meetings and seemed almost passive. The bankers laid out their plan to take Koch public. They revealed what, to most executives at least, might have been the most significant detail. If Charles Koch agreed to the deal, he could earn $20 million overnight. The bankers seemed incredulous when they prepared a confidential memo about Koch's reaction. He does not want this cash, the memo reported. Charles Koch calmly explained to them why their offer made no sense. His company was breathtakingly profitable. It operated in vital, deeply complex corners of the American energy industry. During the 1980s, Koch Industries was the largest purchaser and transporter of U.S. crude oil. It owned an oil refinery. It employed teams of commodity traders who bought and sold a wildly diverse menu of raw materials and financial products, from gasoline to paper futures contracts. This might have encouraged most CEOs to take their company public. Koch Industries, however, did not want outsiders to know how much money its traders were earning. Taking the company public would expose too many of its secrets. The memo said, certain of Koch's commodity traders are particularly worried that their high salaries, once disclosed to the public, would be used against them by their trading partners. Secrecy was a strategic necessity for Koch Industries. Charles Koch did not want to surrender it. He also didn't want to surrender control. He had a specific, clear vision of how to run his company, and he didn't need Wall Street investors to interfere. If the bankers expected Charles Koch to go along with the conventional wisdom of their time, then they, like so many outsiders, did not understand him. Beneath his low-key veneer, Charles Koch was, at his core, a fighter. He had unmovable ideas about how things should be, and he did not back down when challenged. When he was challenged by his own brothers for control of Koch Industries, he fought them in a bitter legal battle that lasted decades. When he was challenged by members of a powerful labor union during his first years as CEO, he fought them even as they committed an act of industrial sabotage that nearly destroyed Koch's oil refinery. When the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice launched a criminal investigation into Koch Industries' oil gathering business, Charles Koch fought them with every legal and political tool at his disposal. When a liberal Congress and President Barack Obama sought to impose regulations on the fossil fuel industry to control greenhouse gas emissions, Charles Koch fought them in ways that changed U.S. politics. In each of these fights, Charles Koch prevailed. When Charles Koch dismissed the bankers in 1981, it was just a small skirmish in the larger war to control Koch Industries. After prevailing in that fight, he created a company that was true to his vision. He avoided the snares that entangled many publicly traded companies that report their financial results to investors every 3 months. Koch Industries didn't have to think quarter to quarter. The company thinks year to year. An internal think tank and deal-making committee called the Development Group will sometimes think through a business deal on a timeline measured in decades. This long-term view made Koch more nimble where other companies stumbled. In 2003, for example, Koch Industries bought a group of money-losing fertilizer plants when no publicly traded company was willing to take the risk. Today, those plants are as profitable as a broken ATM machine that spews out cash around the clock. Unlike publicly traded companies, Koch Industries does not pay out rich dividends to investors. Charles Koch insists on reinvesting at least 90% of the company's profits, fueling its constant expansion. This strategy laid the foundation for decades of continuous growth. Koch Industries expanded continuously by purchasing other companies and branching out into new industries. It specialized in the kind of businesses that are indispensable to modern civilization, but which most consumers never directly encounter. The company is embedded in the hidden infrastructure of everyday life. Millions of people use Koch's products without ever seeing Koch's name attached. Koch refines and distributes fossil fuels, from gasoline to jet fuel, on which the global economy is dependent. Koch is the world's third largest producer of nitrogen fertilizer, which is the cornerstone of our modern food system. Koch makes the synthetic materials used in baby diapers, waistbands, and carpets. It makes the chemicals used for plastic bottles and pipes. It owns Georgia Pacific, which makes the wall panels, beams, and plywood required to build homes and office buildings. It makes napkins, paper towels, stationery, newspaper, and personal hygiene products. Koch Industries owns a network of commodities trading offices in Houston, Moscow, Geneva, and elsewhere, which are the circulatory system of modern finance. The book, Cokeland by Christopher Leonard. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Free. And instead, he's sitting there live tweeting Fox News, literally every.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Ari in Chicago. Hey, Ari, what's up?
Hi. I've talked to you before, and I'm nervous, but I was a long-time listener since 2001 on Air America and WCPT, and I did what you said. I got out and got active, and you've inspired me. So I wanted to say that first, and thank you for that. I also wanted to talk about Andrew Yang. A lady mentioned him earlier, and I'm excited because the movement is growing bigger and bigger. We've been collecting signatures to get him on the ballot for Illinois. We still need Kentucky, Iowa, New Hampshire, Ohio. So he needs to compete, and I would urge people to try to get some delegates together to do that. I've tried to call before from the Andrew Yang rally about 2 weeks ago, but we did get through to Joan Esposito live, and it was really exciting. And last night I hosted a watch party for Andrew Yang, and I wanted to thank South of the Border, Jamie Murray, Yang's Chicago campaign staff. They helped. They got delegates there. They were collecting signatures and getting them notarized. And also I wanted to give a big thank you to the Chicago Yang Gang and all of the Yang Gang for working so hard to get Yang to the White House. And that answer for William that called in earlier, to vote for their platforms. And Andrew Yang is addressing homelessness and poverty. And the only candidate of color that was on stage addressing these things that affect us as people and human beings. He's offering universal basic income, putting humanity first. And Martin Luther King advocated for it. And look how far we've come. Don't let anyone say he's a long shot, because we are the power, like you said. We've reached Ellen DeGeneres, Whoopi Goldberg, Meghan McCain, Dave Chappelle, now Donnie Glover, Childish Gambino, who was just hired as his creative campaign director. And like I said, the movement is all about the people and starting from the bottom up. And because in an impoverished society, we're seeing what's happening, and we can't function without some help. And it's not a handout, it's a hand up. You know, it's something to give us hope. This man Yang will abolish poverty, homelessness, helping women, artists, musicians, mothers, people that lost their homes. That's me. It gives me hope, and students. And I couldn't afford to go to college, so it gives people hope that didn't have that start, and people that lost everything, people on the streets. And this is something that affects us directly. And his platform speaks very loudly to us, because above everything else, if we're in survival mode and we're worrying about where our next meal is coming, how are we going to be able to pay rent the next month? How are we going to support our kids going to
I'm
school?
sorry, you're in major speech mode here, so I'm going to stop it right now. But it's nice to hear from an Andrew Yang supporter. I think that's absolutely spectacular. And John, come on over here a little closer to me. And Sean, if John sits here, are we both in the shot? Here's your microphone.
Why, thank you, Tom.
And okay, cool. So, John Fugelsang.
Thom Hartmann.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to our humble little office here.
Welcome to our subway system and crumbling infrastructure. Thank you.
And Ron Hartenbaumville. So, tell me about, well, first of all, you saw the debate last night?
I saw the debate last night. I thought it was the most interesting one yet, that it focused on policy more than any I'd seen. And, you know, Tom, for a long time I was thinking, God, is this election going to be like 2004, where you have this unpopular incumbent who we know broke the law, it was WMDs then, and where you have this talented, diverse field of Democrats who just keep knocking each other off until they're so weak that the incumbent who never won the popular vote wins. I've been so terrified of 04. But now the Democratic field is reminding me of the GOP in 12. Seemingly everyone is going to be at the top of the heap for a week or so. And last night looked like, it's Pete Buttigieg's party now. And I was thinking, God, I bet Amy Klobuchar is in the front by mid-January. They all had a good night. I didn't think anyone was damaged. I thought it's still, you're either with Senator Sanders or Warren, or you're looking for a moderate alternative to Biden idol.
Yeah.
And that seems to be the reality show.
And for that matter, Joe Biden actually did better last
night. He had a great night
on any of the one. And I finally figured out. I mean, and I've said this on the air, particularly in the first two debates. I thought what he was showing was age. You know, that he was missing words. He'd say, "I got two things to say about that," and then he'd forget the second one, and that concerned me. But the major part was he would be in a thought, and then he would just kind of veer off a little bit. And
I agree.
And last night, I figured out at least a good chunk of that isn't that the guy's getting old and senile. It's that he's still struggling with stuttering. Yeah. He would just like have a hard time saying a word, and rather than bang 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 on that word, he would just digress off to some other word or in some other direction. And I because just a few weeks ago I'd read this long article about how he's struggled with stuttering all his life, and I had no idea.
That article was a real game changer for his campaign, I think, because he may have wanted to avoid that subject, but since then it has gotten the subject off his age and onto this, and it's humanized him in a brand new way that most of us who've grown up knowing the guy had never known before.
Yeah, and to the point that Sarah Sanders was ridiculing him today,
what a shock.
We're talking with John Fugelsang. He's the actor, comedian, host of SiriusXM Progress. His show is on from 9 to midnight on SiriusXM. He was with me yesterday. We were doing this little 2-hour holiday special for SiriusXM, or end of the year special, I guess.
Yeah, it's great fun.
Yeah, it was. Every host except Stephanie Miller was there. Basically, a major progressive lineup. And he's also a filmmaker. His latest film is Dream On, a road trip in search of the American dream. JohnFugelsang.com, the website, and of course the Twitter handle as well.
And by the way, I just moved to SiriusXM Progress, and I only did it because I wanted to try to be Tom's Secret Santa at the holiday party. So it's great to be on the channel.
This is the problem. Interviewing a comedian.
Yeah, sorry about that part.
I just can't keep up. You and Stephanie, right? I get in the studio with Stephanie. I'm like, oh, God. Yeah. She thinks so fast. You guys are so good at associative connections.
A lot of that is the cocaine we both use. And the
I did that. I mean, not today, but I did that back in the day, but it didn't seem to help. I really think that there's a different kind of wiring. I mean, my thinking processes tend to be very linear. I take a chunk of data and then I just try to drill down into it.
That's your brilliance.
My best friend was a stand-up comedian. He lives here in New York, Jerry Schneiderman, and known him since the early 70s. And he does the same thing. You're going down some road, mental-wise, and boom, he takes a 90-degree and just like, and the response is to laugh. I mean, that's.
Well, my dad was a history teacher, and I grew up really invested in learning about government and history. And as you know, my parents were both ex-Catholic clergy. My mom was a nun who was a nurse in Africa. My dad a Franciscan brother. So I grew up with that activist social justice Christianity, which I still believe in. And but I realized something very powerful that Billy Wilder said: if you're going to tell people the truth, make it funny or they will kill you. And so that sort of thing of like having the references come in. If I just went on stage and tried to talk about what I care about, it would be propaganda and boring. But the jokes are the lubrication, if you will, that helps move the point along and often balances it out. Yeah. I mean, you reach a lot more of our conservative brothers and sisters if you can make them laugh, because they'll trust you. That's why people, I think, trust comics more than they trust a lot of politicians or a lot of journalists, because if there's an element of truth, you'll laugh and you'll recognize that.
Yeah. I took a screenwriting course from Robert McKee.
Oh, yeah,
In fact,
of course.
I took it 3 times.
Yeah.
Louise took it twice, and our youngest daughter took it once. All
Brilliant
all
man.
together. He is. He's just mind-boggling. And he made a comment, kind of almost as an aside, because we were talking about, mostly it was about mystery and suspense, and I was there as a novelist. And he said, in comedy, what you do is you establish an expectation, and then you violate it in a way that makes perfect sense. And Red
Yes.
Skelton. I just flew in from Pittsburgh, and boy, are my arms tired, right?
Yeah.
And that's the moment, and then the reaction to that is one of both surprise and relief,
Mm-hmm.
and realization, all kind of rolled together, which produces laughter. Are you? At that moment when he said that, I thought, oh my God, there's a science to comedy.
Sure.
Is that something that you knew, or have you always had that ability throughout your life and it just kind of intuitively?
I think it's something I'm always trying to learn more. And many times in political comedy, it's taking that truth and then finding the trope that turns it on its head. Like when Trump came back from meeting the Saudi royal family, my joke was, I just flew in from Saudi Arabia and boy, are my arm sales tired. I mean, it's just...
Well, it's a double on Hunter.
Yeah. So it's just a matter of, like finding where it is. I mean, Tom Petty once said, God's already written all the great songs, you just have to find them. And it's sort of the same with a joke. And I think Twitter has made a lot of people even better comedians because it's all about the economy.
Yeah.
It's all about paring down a paragraph to just a thought and a notion.
You're
really
listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back with John Fugelsang. Stick around. Hey, Sean, I had my IFB out, which is why I missed the break, because John's mix minus is not set properly, and he was echoing in my ear with a 1-second delay. If you can fix that, that would be appreciated.
Sorry, Sean, I blame myself as a former Catholic.
Jesus. There you go.
yeah.
It's like, all right. Thank you, Sean. She says she'll work on it. The little voice in my ear. Do you have voices in your ears?
All the time. All the time. And most of them guilt, but there's still a few.
Yeah. Is it, seriously? I mean, the Catholic guilt thing? Yeah. Tell me about it.
Are we rolling? Are we on?
Yeah,
Here's the deal.
Well, we're not on Sirius XM right now. But
I know
on,
that.
We're on
yeah.
about half my audience. Is still
People
with us.
talk about Jewish guilt, and that's great. It's often confused with Catholic guilt. The Catholics took guilt and made it shame, and it's actually kind of important to understand some folks. Like, if you feel bad about something you did, that's guilt, and that can be good. If you feel bad about who you are as a person, that's shame. And if you feel shame because you believe God wishes you had more guilt, that's Catholic. And that's sort of how I was raised.
There's actually a logic to that. I mean, one of the I call myself a Christian. I went through seminary. I was the pastor of a church in Detroit for 2 years.
Yes, you were.
I've been there. I've done that. But I also, the biggest problem that I have with Christianity and Judaism, for that matter, and Islam, is the doctrine of born of woman, therefore sin.
Therefore sin.
The doctrine
Complete
of
rubbish,
original
yeah.
sin. And
they'll tell you you're born of sin, but then they'll talk about innocent life in the womb. Make up your mind, pals.
oh, that's a good point. I hadn't even thought of.
Oh, yeah.
Well, actually, it's not until you come out through the birth canal.
And the Bible says...
Because that's where fun happens.
And the Bible says life doesn't begin till first breath. So, I think...
thus the word inspiration.
Yeah, I kind of go for the morality and the teachings of Jesus. I love the magic tricks. I love all the great Jew magicians, going back to Houdini. Fantastic. But really, for me, it's the lessons of Jesus, the incredibly, insanely liberal teachings, which is what got him killed, as you well know. Yeah. I don't say that I'm Christian anymore. I say I aspire to be Christian. I say the same thing about being liberal. I aspire to be liberal. I don't claim, it's like being woke. I don't think you ever get there. It is a destination.
Yeah, well, we were talking about that yesterday.
We did.
That word has been turned into it's been weaponized. I'm not sure how long it's going to last.
I agree. I agree because...
or what's going to come next. It's like every generation. I mean, when I was a kid in the 60s, it was like we're hip,
Yeah.
And or it's cool. I mean, there were a couple of words that...
But woke is not so much about style. It is about morality and awareness of justice.
No, this was then, too.
Oh, yeah. Well,
I mean,
hip,
it was
yeah,
a sense
you're
of, he's square, I'm hip.
Oh, I gotcha.
And in other words, this guy doesn't know what's actually going on. He doesn't understand why we shouldn't have the war. He doesn't understand why you should treat people decently. Fill in the blanks. I mean, it was just that generation's version of it.
What I love is that irony is the one religion that'll never let you down. And, when I was a kid, I knew that the Eisenhower Republicans were the squares and the hippies were the hip ones. Now it's the hippies who are fighting for Eisenhower policies. I mean, if I have any political affiliation, I say I'm an Eisenhower Republican, because everything that Eisenhower, the square, fought for is what the far left people are fighting for now. Progressive taxation, massive infrastructure spending, socialist programs like the GI Bill, both political parties strongly supporting labor unions.
Expanding Social Security.
The hipsters are now fighting for what I did.
I often play on my show clips from his farewell address.
What an address.
And the parts that go way beyond the military-industrial complex, and they're just completely ignored by history. We're hitting a break right now, so we'll be right back. Stick around. And welcome back. John Fugelsang is with us. He is the actor, comedian, and I just realized just learned it's only a month old. Your brand new show on Sirius XM.
Well, we've been on Sirius for about almost 5 years, but we just moved to the Progress channel last month.
Right, 9 to midnight.
9 to midnight. They made me an offer I couldn't refuse.
There you go. You say we?
We?
You said we just moved. Is that
yes,
the royal we?
Yes, me and my show just moved,
okay. Cool.
and my guests, because we kept a lot of our regular guests and journalists.
That's great. And you can find it on Sirius XM Progress 127, 9 to midnight Eastern, 6 to 9
And
Pacific.
as you know, that Sirius XM is now the world's largest streaming audio company. That we position the show as both a live 3-hour broadcast at night or a 3-hour podcast the next day.
Yeah, and and not only that, you don't have to have a satellite receiver to get Sirius XM. You can buy an app subscription, and the apps are ubiquitous.
Exactly.
That's how I listen to all kinds of things on my phone. Not to turn this into just some kind of terrible
commercial,
exactly. but I'm very grateful.
Well, I'm proud to finally be on a channel with you, Tom. It's been a real
back
thrill.
at you, John.
Yeah, thank you.
Back at you. So the fate and future. I mean, we've kind of discussed the fate and future of the world and politics and all that kind of thing. I'm wondering though, can you handicap the Democratic race?
If you had asked me a year ago what I thought was the strongest ticket, I would have said Biden-Harris in terms of the strongest ticket to beat Trump. And it might still be. But it's strange. There's really two different races. People either want someone who will completely reform our entire system and unrig our economic system, or they want someone who will beat up Donald Trump on a debate stage and just get him out, and we'll see what happens next. We
can't get both?
Well, it's either a transplant or a tourniquet. You can get both. And I certainly think that Senator Sanders could do it. I think this whole thing might come down to Biden versus Sanders.
I think Warren has at least as good a chance as Bernie does.
I think Warren does as well.
And there's a whole bunch of people, and we saw a couple of them yesterday, who are still so pissed off at Bernie for having had the audacity to challenge Hillary.
And I have to deal with it every day. The Bernie-Hillary civil war is still raging, and it is
and if
Trump's
Warren
greatest
is the
hope.
nominee, that all goes away, which is not to say that I don't want Bernie, because I love Bernie.
I love Bernie.
Bernie was on my show for 11 years.
I listen to Bernie on your show every week, and Bernie's done my show many times. I've done events with him. I love him personally, but I say to Bernie fans, and they get mad at me, when I ask people why they don't like Bernie Sanders, because I can't understand why you wouldn't, it's almost always the same thing, his male fans' online behavior. I keep hearing it time and time again. And here's the deal with Senator Sanders. He stood on that stage at the DNC and said Hillary Clinton must become the next president of the United States. He endorsed her. So anytime...
He didn't just endorse her.
He did.
Outside of Tim Kaine, there was no other politician in America who gave more speeches in more locations before more people on behalf of Hillary Clinton for president than Bernie Sanders.
He was not a spoiler. If he'd run third party, that's a spoiler. Right. I was on MSNBC on Joy Reid's show when they were trying to, await who Hillary's VP pick would be, and they asked me my thoughts, and I said, well, you'll think I'm crazy, but Bernie Sanders. And they all looked at me like I had 9 heads, but I thought, look, JFK and LBJ didn't like each other, but the fact is Sanders would bring that enthusiasm. I don't want to relitigate the whole thing, but I thought it would have been a much more powerful and a ticket with broader appeal.
Well, this is what
I love Warren too, but like, look, Tom, if it's Marianne Williamson, Bill de Blasio ticket, I'm there. Like whoever it is, I'll take.
Marianne's a friend of mine.
Marianne's a friend of mine.
I would love to see.
I'd love to see Marianne do well. I'll take anyone, but I'd rather have a haircut than a beheading. I'm not into a purity test.
But you know, the bottom line is, I think that the Republicans have been running base strategies since 1980.
Oh yeah.
That's what they figured out in 1980, is we're going to lose elections from, actually, you could say since 64, arguably, except Nixon didn't really run, well, Nixon sort of ran a base strategy in 68. But
the drug war and the Southern strategy were,
Barry Goldwater did.
He warned us.
And it was so idealistic. And you have to understand the 1960s, early 60s, late 50s. I mean, I was 13 years old, and I went door to door with my dad in 1964 for Barry Goldwater. Wow. At the same time that Hillary Clinton, who must have been 5 years older than me, was going door to door for Barry Goldwater. Yeah. I mean, a bunch of us who grew up to be Democratic idealists started with Barry Goldwater.
But who did Barry Goldwater warn us about? The preachers, the right-wing preachers, and the right-wing oil guys.
That's right.
And that unholy alliance that kind of came together post Roe v. Wade. I mean, the greatest achievement, the reason the Republican Party is this powerful is all about Christianity. And they've convinced followers of Jesus to vote against everything Jesus ever talked about by talking about abortion, which Jesus never talked about. Correct. We have people who believe the talking snake is literal fact, but love your enemies is Jesus being all metaphorical.
Yeah, absolutely. But my point in all this is that Republicans said, we're going to run base strategies on a set of core principles, which they kind of threw away with Reagan, but nonetheless, we're going to run base strategies, and they win with that. And Democrats stopped covenant speech, which was his stump speech in '92. It was FDR's second New Deal. Yeah. He was talking about jobs for everybody, housing for everybody, health care for everybody. I mean, it was, and of course, famously, the three guys sat him down. Guy who became the head of the Fed, Andrea Mitchell's husband, and
Greenspan.
Greenspan and all these guys. They sat him down and said, "Son, you're not going to govern this way." But and Democrats have not been running base campaigns since then.
Is that because the GOP has a base, but Democrats have several smaller bases?
No, I think it's because the Democratic Party. See, in '92, Reagan had decimated the unions at that point, which was the major source of income for the Democratic Party. Yeah. So Clinton and Al Fromm reached out to banks, insurance companies, the quote clean industries, airlines. We'll take your money.
That's right.
And the Democratic Party became a corporate party in '92, and it's stayed that way up until now.
I struggle with this because that's the triangulation we speak of.
Exactly right, and that is something that Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders are not doing.
Exactly.
They're saying we're going to run a base strategy, and I believe that if either one of those two people are the nominees, they will wipe the floor with the Republicans, because we haven't seen a base strategy in this country since '64.
Well, I completely agree. I think the worst nightmare of Donald Trump and the oligarchs is conservative men and women actually hearing Bernie and Elizabeth Warren speak at length.
There you go.
However, the real collusion is Donald Trump and the people who own the media, because they like their ratings, their circulation, and their tax code.
We got a wrap. John Fugelsang, check him out on SiriusXM 9 to midnight Eastern time. And thanks so much for being with us. We'll be back. Well, we'll be back.
Happy impeachment.
Yeah, there you go. Happy impeachment. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.